She is the third kind of beauty author. Tianze Shui copywriting fake weak and ignorant, really gentle and stubborn girl 1, Lu Yingxi, X fake cool and abstinent, really sick and delicate belly black girl 2, Jianqing, copywriting 1. When Lu Yingxi woke up, she found herself transmigrated into the cannon fodder female supporting role in the novel. The female supporting role is the canary picked up by the villain, weak and ignorant, innocent and harmless, like a daughter, clinging tightly to the villain. The villain, Jianqing, lives up to his name, cold and alienated, like thin snow on branches, with a trace of gloom in the corners of his brows and eyes, a gentle scum, who will get revenge, will do whatever it takes to achieve his goals, and finally end in a tragic end. Lu Yingxi regretted his life and decided to escape Jianqing's control step by step. On the night when she was about to escape, Jianqing was drunk, held her in her arms, her eyes were red, and kissed the corner of her lips restrainedly. Her voice was low and soft, "Don't leave, I'm only left with you." Copywriting 2. Sometimes to heal, often to help, always to comfort. This famous saying is the truest portrayal of oncology. In the field of tumors, the sense of achievement of doctors never comes from the cure of saving lives, but from prolonging the life of every cancer patient and relieving the pain of every patient. The temple of modern medicine is made up of piles of white bones. We are all ants, and the contributions we make in our lives are just a drop in the ocean. Copywriting 3. If there is new snow and the first snowfall, the full moon is in the sky, Hao Ying is spread below shining silver, and you come to me with a smile between moonlight and snow. You are the third kind of beauty. Yu Guangzhong. Beautiful color content tags, urban love, special liking, industry elites, wearing books. Search keywords, protagonist, Lu Yingxi, Jianqing supporting role, others, 1 sentence introduction, you are the third kind of beauty. Conception, 1. Sometimes to heal, often to help, always to comfort, 2. In adversity, forge ahead, redeem others, redeem yourself. The moonlight is like water, soaking the whole house. Lu Yingxi woke up from his sleep. For a moment he didn't know what night it was, where he was. She blinked twice blankly, and her eyes slid to the huge French window on the right. The curtains are not drawn, and outside the window is the first snowfall and a full moon in the sky. In winter, after the snow. On a full moon night, everything is silent. I haven't seen such a bright moonlight for many years. In my impression, I only saw it in the countryside when I was a child. At that time, in midsummer, Grandma was holding her, with the cat lying on her lap, enjoying the coolness in the yard and admiring the moon. It was so beautiful that it was unreal, like being in a dream. Are you still dreaming? His temples throbbed and his mind was extremely chaotic. Lu Yingxi closed his eyes and rubbed his forehead. It's time to wake up and catch up with the announcement. She stretched out habitually, stretched out her left hand, and suddenly touched a lump of softness. It felt particularly warm and soft to the touch. She subconsciously held it and pressed it. 5 fingers felt the rebound of vitality. Lu Yingxi froze, opened his eyes and looked to the left. In the next second, she withdrew her left hand as if burning, pulled up the quilt to cover her chest, and shrank back. A woman lay beside her. Under the moonlight, the woman's black hair was like a waterfall, scattered between the pillows, her eyebrows were picturesque, her nose was straight, and her temperament was cold, as if she smelled the smell of thin snow on the branches. Does snow have a smell? Some. In the winter in the countryside, the heavy snow crushes the green pines for a whole night, and the door is opened the next day. The green pines turn into Qiangzi, the snow is wrapped in rosin, and a breath of air conditioning is sucked into the lungs. It is clean, biting, and refreshing. Lu Yingxi sighed softly. Sure enough, he was still in a dream. How can there be such a beautiful moonlight in reality? In the moonlight, there is such a stunning woman lying beside her. After realizing the current situation, Lu Yingxi slowly lowered his guard, loosened the quilt covering his chest, and looked down at his clothes. The scarlet nightgown, brand new, without the slightest trace of mess. A belt was loosely tied around the waist, the neckline of the nightgown was wide open, and under the collarbone, the scenery was infinite. This dress! Could it be that the self in my dream likes to walk in a wild style? Unexpectedly, he was so sullen. Liu Yingxi hurriedly gathered up his collar, fastened his belt, then turned his head, staring at the beautiful face of the woman beside him. She remembered that she had read Freud's The Interpretation of Dreams, which said, dreams are the fulfillment of human subconscious desires. I can't help being a little disappointed in myself. Well, I didn't pursue it. It's rare to have a spring dream, skipping the lingering before the event, and jumping directly to sleeping together after the event. What a loss! Liu Yingxi rubbed his forehead and chuckled, and found a reason for his brain, probably because the other party is of the same sex. His brain couldn't weave specific details, so he simply skipped it. After all, living to the age of 25, she really has no experience with the same sex. There are quite a few gays in the industry she works in, or rather, many people are gender neutral and can be both male and female. In Vanity Fair, there are many sensual people, and she doesn't want to be that kind of person. It's not what she wants to start a relationship rashly and then end it without knowing it. She doesn't like chaotic relationships, no matter the same or the opposite sex. She just wants to love someone seriously. One-night stands, nurturing, unspoken rules, drunken sex, these words are far away from her, so the current situation will only appear in a dream. Strengthening this idea, Liu Yingxi looked at the woman on the bed, hesitated for a moment, approached cautiously, knelt beside her, stretched out his left hand, wanting to touch her. It's just a dream. The flower in the mirror, like the moon in the water. The moment his fingertips were about to touch her red lips, Liu Yingxi stopped abruptly. She was afraid of waking her up. Her sleeping face is quiet and soft, like an ink painting under the moonlight, quiet and simple, suitable for shades. Liu Yingxi couldn't bear to wake her up. The slender fingers rested on the red lips without touching them, the warm and long breath brushed over the fingertips, and the fingertips trembled slightly. Liu Yingxi curled up his fingers, retracted his arms, quietly, only tracing her face with gentle eyes. Then he raised his head and looked at this strange room under the bright moonlight. There are 3 white walls and 1 floor-to-ceiling window. There are few items in the room, and the bedside table can be seen at a glance. There is a stack of periodicals and magazines on the cabinet, a dark blue ballpoint pen, a black glasses case, and a gleaming dagger. Why put a dagger by the bedside? Liu Yingxi frowned in puzzlement, and felt that this dream was too real in an instant, and what he saw with his eyes showed every detail. Just as he was fascinated, a touch of cold softness suddenly wrapped around his left wrist. Liu Yingxi subconsciously looked at the woman on the pillow. The woman on the pillow closed her eyes slightly, rubbing the center of her eyebrows with one hand, and pinching Liu Yingxi's wrist with the other. The wrist was pinched so painfully, Liu Yingxi frowned slightly. Before he could make a sound, the hand that was clasping Hao's wrist was pulled suddenly. Liu Yingxi's half of his body was unstable, and he fell into the woman's arms. The strength of the wrist was released, but a pair of hands tightened around the waist. The 2 soft bodies pressed against each other. Liu Yingxi buried his head on the side of the strange woman's neck, his lips brushed against the smooth and delicate skin, and his mind went blank for an instant. Dazed for a few seconds, Liu Yingxi hurriedly moved his lips away, propped himself up, and met the gaze of the strange woman. She has a pair of very beautiful eyes, like autumn water, like cold stars, but her gaze is extremely cold. Looking at herself is no different from looking at a stone on the side of the road. Everything touched was soft and warm that is unique to women. Liu Yingxi had no place to rest his hands, and his eyes wandered for a moment, so he leaned on her shoulders, whispered, and asked, "What's your name?" The person under him didn't answer, and his eyes showed a hint of scrutiny. She loosened the restraint a little, and stroked Liu Yingxi's neck with her right hand attached to Liu Yingxi's back. Lu Yingxi continued to speak, "My name is Lu Yingxi, which is the deer drinking creek of Frost Falls, bears rise to trees, and forest is empty. Deer drinking creek. I was born in winter, and my mother said that she dreamed that a small deer crossed the river. Jungle, jumping to the stream to drink water, gave me this name, it's easy to remember." With a serious look, it looks like a kindergarten kid introducing himself in class. Childish and serious. After a pause, Lu Yingxi asked softly, "What about you? Tell me your name, okay? Even if Chun." Very serious. The woman below her had clear eyes, and her cold fingers lingered from the back of Lu Yingxi's neck to her earlobes, and they gently squeezed and twisted slowly, word by word, and said, simple simplicity, clear water. Simple, simple. Lu Yingxi recited it silently twice, remembering it firmly, and a strange feeling suddenly appeared in his heart. The name is very familiar, as if I have seen it somewhere. The earlobes were already flushed red, so Jianqing used her thumbs instead to gently scratch the brown tear mole under Lu Yingxi's eyes. The ambiguity floating in the moonlight entangled little by little, and Lu Yingxi squeezed out a trace of clarity, breaking the silent and ambiguous atmosphere. "Did I meet you somewhere? This doesn't seem like the first time we met." "The first time we met, in a private club." "And then?" Lu Yingxi frowned, unable to remember which private club he went to and met this person. "This person is so good looking, if she sees it, she will never forget it." Then Jianqing stroked Lu Yingxi's brows with her fingertips, her tone was calm, her eyes undiminished, "I brought you home." As soon as these words came out, the ambiguity instantly condensed under the moonlight. Lu Yingxi slowly sat up and distanced himself from each other. "What do you mean? What to bring home? Nurturing? Or a one-night stand? Either way, it can't happen to her. Even if it's a dream, even if this person is good-looking, you can't insult people like this casually." Jianqing reached out, opened her belt and nightgown, and answered her question with actions. The belt was loosened, and the nightgown slipped off like water and was stacked around her waist. The moonlight kissed her back reverently, making her skin as delicate and flawless as suet white jade. Lu Yingxi was naked. Sitting on Jianqing's waist, her upper body was naked, and all her tenderness faded away. She closed her eyes to hide the anger surging in her pupils, raised her left hand, and with a slap, slapped the person below her hard across the face. With a snap, the refrigerator door was closed casually. A woman in a black dressing gown stood by the refrigerator. The woman was tall and slender, with red and swollen cheeks, and a cold expression. The bright red blood snaked down the crevice of her left finger, tick-tock, and collected all over the floor. She pulled a thin towel and wrapped it with a medical ice pack from the refrigerator. The ice pack was pressed against the face, and the biting chill melted into the flesh and blood along the texture. Jianqing remained calm, covering her face while looking at the sofa in the living room. The person on the sofa had black hair, red lips, clear eyebrows, hugging his knees, red eyes, slender, clean and wronged, as if she was the one who was beaten. Sensing Jianqing's gaze, Lu Yingxi looked up at her. Looking at each other for 2 seconds, Lu Yingxi's lips paled a little, subconsciously raised his left hand to tighten his collar, and shrank his body to the corner of the sofa. Like a frightened kitten. Jianqing put down the ice pack, walked over, and looked down at her from a height. Lu Yingxi stared at Jianqing for a few seconds, then lowered his head, looked at her left hand that was bleeding continuously, felt palpitations and dizziness for a moment, his face became paler, and tremblingly said, You bandage it." After slapping the man, Lu Yingxi picked up the dagger from the bedside table to defend himself. Unexpectedly, the man grabbed the blade without blinking, pulled the dagger and threw it on the ground. "It's like a madman to the blade with his bare hands." Jianqing turned a deaf ear, raised her hand to look at the blood on her palm, then looked at Lu Yingxi's pale lips, thought for a moment, bent her index finger, and lifted her chin. Liu Yingxi was still in shock, holding his breath and not daring to move. The chin was lifted, and the blood-stained thumb covered the soft lips. Along the lip line, from left to right, slowly apply it until the lips were bright red. The fingertips are cold and the blood is warm. The red liquid seeped into the mouth along the cracks of the lips, the smell of blood diffused, and the tip of the tongue tasted the taste of blood. Liu Yingxi trembled slightly, his eyes were as red as a rabbit, and he turned his head with difficulty, cursing, "You are sick." "No." Jianqing let go of her hand, and retorted coldly, "I don't have any diseases that can be transmitted through blood." "You are mentally ill." Liu Yingxi glared at her viciously as his stomach was overwhelmed. He raised his left hand to cover his mouth, trying to suppress the urge to retch, and wiped his lips vigorously. Soon, the back of his hand was stained with bright red blood. Jianqing dug out the medicine box, sat on the other side of the sofa, observed the wound on his left palm under the light in silence. From the tiger's mouth of the left hand to the horizontal crease of the palm under the little finger, a 5 cm long oblique wound was seen. There are two most feared palm cut injuries caused by sharp knives. One is nerve and tendon rupture, which needs to be repaired with local anesthesia, the other is infection with Clostridium tetani, which causes tetanus. When confronting each other just now, she reached out to the dagger, but Liu Yingxi let go almost instantly, allowing the dagger to be snatched away by her, so the cut on her left palm was not particularly deep. The dagger has been sterilized by soaking in alcohol, so there is no need to worry about getting tetanus. Compression to stop bleeding, debridement and suture to avoid wound infection. It is not difficult to stop blood wounds, but the trouble is that the left hand is injured, and it is inconvenient to suture with the right hand alone. The wound was 5 cm long, without sutures, prone to repeated bleeding, slow healing, and prone to infection. After cleaning his left palm with povidone iodine and normal saline, Jianqing searched through the medicine box, but found no skin staples and devices or medical glue that could replace the needles, so he had to bandage it first to prevent the wound from being exposed to the air for a long time. Liu Yingxi caught a glimpse of her skilled and professional movements, as if she had practiced hundreds of times, and finally remembered that this person was a doctor. Medical oncologist. It is the same profession as the former Liu Yanxi. Sensing her gaze, Jianqing turned to look at her. Their eyes met, Liu Yingxi gritted his teeth and snorted coldly, turned his head away, avoided staring at each other, and looked at the French windows in the living room. The floor-to-ceiling windows were tightly covered by black curtains, preventing any light from entering. The huge living room is like an airtight cage. 5 minutes ago, after a slap, Liu Yingxi finally remembered why the name Jianqing sounded so familiar. She read it in a novel. Last night, the moon was bright and the stars were sparse. Beside the bright moon, there were two extremely bright stars. The news reported that it was a rare celestial phenomenon. Double stars with the moon Venus, Jupiter, and the moon appeared in the night sky at the same time. She moved a computer and sat outside on the balcony, watching the moon and stars while processing emails from work. Some advertisements popped up in the lower right corner of the computer from time to time, and she closed them over and over again, but a novel promotion popped up that she couldn't close no matter what. In desperation, I clicked in and took a look, and found that it was an urban romance novel. The hero was a thoracic surgeon, the heroine was an actress in the entertainment industry, and the title of the book was Starlight at the Blade's Edge. Liu Yingxi is an actor and has also studied in medical university for 2 years. She is familiar with both the medical and entertainment circles. She couldn't help but take a second look and found that there was a female supporting role in the book with the same name and surname as her. Even with the same name and surname, family background, appearance, and hobbies are almost all written according to her, and it is also written that she was taken care of by a woman. It's just bullshit. Liu Yingxi hastily browsed through a few pages, then scrolled directly to the back, and found that the cold and indifferent funder in the early stage had become a murderous villain at some point. She hurriedly searched for her ending, and saw the deer drinking creek in the later stage, betraying the benefactor again and again. In a rage, the Gold Master imprisoned her in the villa. She couldn't bear it anymore and chose to commit suicide, and was finally buried under the plum tree as flower fertilizer. The same name and the same surname are too dramatic. After Liu Yingxi skipped and read the novel, he wanted to close the web page, and clicked the mouse several times in a row, but there was no response. It looked like the web page was stuck, so she closed the computer cover, forced it to shut down, took a shower and went to bed. Who would have thought that upon waking up, he would enter this strange world and become a canary? In the future, he would be buried under the plum blossom tree by this cold and beautiful woman as flower fertilizer. Liu Yingxi withdrew his gaze, wrapped his arms around his knees, and curled up in the corner of the sofa. His eyes were red. The more he thought about it, the more desperate he became. Jianqing followed Liu Yingxi's line of sight and looked at the floor-to-ceiling windows for a few seconds. She packed the medicine box with one hand, and when she was about to put it back, she glanced at the back of Liu Yanxi's blood-stained hand, opened the medicine box again, took out a pack of sterile gauze and hand sanitizer gel, and walked to Liu Yanxi in front of Zixi, handed it to her. Liu Yingxi turned his head and ignored it. The kindness was not accepted. Jianqing didn't say anything, put the things on the coffee table, and took Liu Yingxi's left hand with his right hand. "Don't touch me!" Liu Yingxi subconsciously wanted to break free, but was held tight. In desperation, she grabbed Jianqing's injured left hand, squeezed it hard, squeezed the wound, and tried to stab her so that she would let go. Bright red blood oozes out of the bandaged palm again, and there is a sharp pain in the palm. Jianqing doesn't say a word, still doesn't let him go, just frowned. Seeing the blood, Liu Yingxi turned pale, stopped struggling, and stared blankly at the person in front of him. Does this person feel no pain? Seeing her calm down, Jianqing took a deep breath, then picked up the gauze soaked in disinfectant gel, and wiped the blood stains on the back of her hand for her. A strong smell of alcohol entered the nostrils. A familiar and long-lost taste. Liu Yingxi was a little dazed. After a while, a warm touch covered the corners of her lips. Jianqing began to wipe the blood stains from the corners of her lips with a gauze soaked in warm water. Her movements are very light, her eyes are focused and serious, as if she is carefully polishing a delicate sculpture. Liu Yingxi regained consciousness, pressed her hand, said with red eyes, "I'll do it myself. Don't bully me." Jianqing paused. Her left palm and cheek still hurt badly. Who is bullying whom? Without saying anything, Jianqing handed the clean gauze to Liu Yingxi, walked to the French window, and threw the dirty gauze into a trash can covered with a yellow garbage bag. After Liu Yingxi wiped the blood stains, he raised his wrist to wipe away his tears, then looked at the blood-stained gauze in his hand, hesitated for a few seconds, walked over, and threw the gauze into the trash can. Yellow garbage bags are generally used to install medical waste. Jianqing stood by the French window and clicked on the electronic screen on the wall. The curtains automatically spread to both sides, and the moonlight poured in, making the ground bright and clean. Liu Yingxi looked up. Outside the window, the moon is bright and the stars are sparse. Beside the bright moon, there are only two extremely bright stars. Turning her head again, she looked at Jianqing on her right. Jianqing stood quietly under the moonlight. Her profile was like jade, her back was as straight as a pine, her temperament was as cold as snow, she was as beautiful as a fairy who sucked the essence of the sun and the moon. Is this person cultivated from ice cubes on a high mountain? It's so cold that it can freeze people to death. Jianqing noticed Liu Yingxi's gaze, turned her head, and looked at her too. They looked at each other silently. Seeing the bright red and swollen palm print at close range, Liu Yingxi was a little embarrassed, avoided looking at each other, and looked out the window. Outside the window is the garden, where many plum trees are planted, blossoming red plums, like rouge, standing on the branches, with 2 or 3 pieces of thin snow perched on the branches, one red and one white, complementing each other. Before the flowers were under the moon, Liu Yingxi had no intention of admiring them. He took a step back and was about to leave, but his left wrist was entangled by the cold and delicate touch like a poisonous snake. Jianqing clenched Liu Yingxi's wrist tightly, not letting her go. The wrist was firmly clasped, and Liu Yingxi couldn't break free. Thinking of this man's vindictive temper, she was a little afraid, and she stumbled and argued, "Dr. Jane, it was wrong for me to slap you, but I just defended myself with a dagger. You wanted to grab it yourself. I didn't intend to hurt you. Besides, it was you the one who insulted my personality first. You still have a disagreement, strip me of my clothes." Jianqing remained silent, standing in front of Liu Yingxi, clasping her left wrist with her intact right hand, pressing against the floor-to-ceiling window glass, looking at her coldly with downcast eyes. "You, talk carefully, don't get so close." The tip of the nose smelled the unique cold fragrance of a woman, and the surrounding air seemed to be getting thinner. Liu Yingxi couldn't help but take a half step back, and pressed his back against the floor-to-ceiling windows. Jianqing took a step closer, staring at her with dark eyes, as if she wanted to see the inner soul clearly through the outer shell. As soon as they retreated and moved in, the two got closer, body to body, nose tip to nose tip, and their breaths blended and intertwined. Under the moonlight, the two figures on the ground were close together, like a pair of intimate lovers. After staring at it for a while, Jianqing turned her head slightly, her red lips opened and closed. "I remember you are right-handed, when did you become left-handed?" The warm breath brushed towards the pinny, Liu Yingxi's heart beat violently, and his back tensed unconsciously. How can this be argued against? She is indeed left-handed, and she subconsciously used her left hand in many actions just now. But the original Deer Drinking Creek in the book is not. The Deer Drinking Creek in the book is a character created based on her, but not all of her. She thought of the usual excuses for amnesia after time travel in TV dramas, but without serious traumatic brain injury and no psychological stimulation, pretending to have sudden amnesia in front of a doctor is tantamount to throwing an axe at the door of the class. What's more, amnesia does not make a person suddenly change from right-handed to left-handed. I've always been. A thin layer of sweat broke out in the palm of my hand, Liu Yingxi explained half-truth. Before I was afraid of being discriminated against by you, I pretended to be normal. This is the first time I have been with you for such a long time tonight. I am too nervous, forgot to cover up. She was going to take a gamble. At this point in time, the two had only met a few times, and tonight was the longest time they spent together. Just bet that Jianqing and her are not close friends. You are very used to using your right hand, not pretending. Jianqing looked at her with cold eyes. You have to tell the truth. Being exposed bluntly, Liu Yingxi didn't change his face, and explained a few words in a low voice. I used my left hand when I was young. Many people said I was abnormal and would look at me with strange eyes. The teacher hit my palm when he saw that I was using my left hand. The classmates surrounded me, watched me write, and laughed at me, as if I was a monster. I learned to use my right hand, but in private, I still subconsciously get used to using my left hand. Both hands are used. After a long time, it seems very flexible. This statement is not adulterated. Liu Yingxi was born left-handed and was forcibly corrected. When she was young, she was raised by her grandmother who was thrown by her mother in the countryside. At that time, the country people were more superstitious and thought it was unlucky to be left-handed. When they saw her writing and eating with her left hand, they beat her and told her that she was not well-bred and asked her to change it. Later, when she went to the school in the village, the teacher saw that she was writing with her left hand, so she beat her palm with a bamboo stick. The bamboo sticks were very thin, and the beating was very painful. Her palms were red and swollen, but she felt that she was right, so she didn't cry or make trouble, and didn't change it. She stubbornly continued to write with her left hand. The teacher hates Iron for being weak, and doesn't care about her, but some students like to laugh at her, bully her with excuses, and give her all kinds of ugly nicknames. The children in the countryside are used to being free-range. There is no parent to pick them up and drop them off to and from school, and a few children walk in groups. From kindergarten to elementary school, the other classmates held hands and bounced back home together, lively and bustling, but she was the only one who was always alone, walking back slowly, sometimes being laughed at by passing classmates' sentence. When I got home, the neighbors pointed again. Some persuaded left-handed people to be abnormal and against the laws of nature. Don't want her, leave her in the countryside and ignore her. This hurt people. She heard it, believed it, stood in the yard for a long time with her school bag in her arms, finally took out the exercise book, sat at the stone table in the yard, held back tears, and practiced writing with her right hand. Jianqing didn't say a word, and looked at her silently, as if trying to discern the truth of the words. Lu Yingxi no longer avoided looking at each other, and met Jianqing's scrutinizing gaze, her long eyelashes trembling. Jianqing looked away, and responded irrelevantly, being used to using the left hand is not abnormal, it's just different. Lu Yingxi pulled the corners of her lips and smiled, sometimes, if you are different from most people, you are a different kind, and they will be regarded as abnormal. The smile looked a little bitter. Jianqing said, I won't. The implication is that there is no need to pretend in front of her. Lu Yingxi looked into Jianqing's eyes and didn't speak for a while. Jianqing looked down at her, but didn't speak again. The wrist was entangled in the cold softness, and the pulse was bouncing, beating against the cold palm of the man. The person who circled her wrist must feel it. After silently staring at each other for a long time, Lu Yingxi realized later that the man seemed to be tactfully comforting her, so he said, "Thank you." Jianqing stared at Lu Yingxi's still red eye sockets, then looked down at her feet. The feet are white and slender, and they step on the floor naked. The floor is very clean, but Jianqing has a bit of a cleanliness. Wash your feet and go to bed. Throwing these 4 words, she let go of Lu Yingxi's wrist, didn't pursue the matter of slapping her face and cutting her palm by mistake, and floated back to the room like a ghost. Lu Yingxi watched her leave, raised his left hand, and looked at his wrist. There were a few finger marks left on the wrist, which were very shallow and disappeared in a blink of an eye. The cold and delicate touch on the skin is imprinted in the bottom of my heart, and it will last for a long time. Lu Yingxi lowered his arms, no need to act, all the fragility in his eyes faded away, leaving only calmness. The moonlight is clear outside the window, and the red plums reflect the white snow. Lu Yingxi still didn't care to appreciate it. Thinking of the ending in the book, she was imprisoned in a villa and forced to commit suicide, and her body was buried under a plum tree to make flower fertilizer, so she couldn't appreciate it. Looking at the red plum blossoms, it seems as if you can smell a faint smell of blood. Lu Yingxi rubbed the bridge of his nose, clicked on the electronic screen on the wall, and the curtains closed automatically, blocking the red plums and white snow from sight. She doesn't have a cleanliness fetish, but she has a quirk: she likes to take a hot bath when she's flustered. Lu Yingxi groped to the changing room, picked out a white nightgown, found the bathroom, and took off the original owner's red nightgown. Turn on the shower, pour hot water down your head, and pour it all over your body. Lu Yingxi wiped his face and stood in the dense water vapor to meditate. She really hoped that all this was a dream, that she would still be in her own bed when she woke up. But if it wasn't a dream, and she really went to another world, then it's useless to complain, and it's useless to be afraid. I can only calm down, stay away from dangerous people, save my life, and wait for the time to return to reality. How to leave, when to leave, need to plan step by step. The warm water rinsed the body over and over again, washing away the strong perfume smell of the original owner, and gradually washing away Liu Yingxi's uneasy mood. After taking a shower and drying himself, Liu Yingxi put on his nightgown, walked to the sink in front of the mirror, picked up the water, and rinsed his mouth continuously to wash away the faint smell of blood that lingered in his mouth. The image of the ice cube picking up her chin and smearing blood on her lips was still in her mind, and perverted. Liu Yingxi disliked her extremely, and her affection for Jianqing went from being infinitely high in bed to now infinitely lower. After rinsing his mouth, Liu Yingxi wiped off the moisture from the mirror, stared intently at the face in the mirror, and froze. This face is exactly the same as her in reality, only a few years younger. In his early 20s, he is beautiful, clean, and free from dust. With such a pure and unaffected face, it looks very clean and self-sufficient. How could it be possible to be taken care of? While cursing in his heart, Liu Yingxi blew his hair until it was 7% dry. After drying her hair, she returned to the living room. The villa is equipped with floor heating, and the room temperature is acceptable. She doesn't want to sleep next to that ice cube, and plans to sleep on the sofa for the night. As she lay down, she saw the rest of the sterile gauze and hand sanitizer gel on the table. Turned over, facing the back of the sofa, not looking. When you see those, you will think of that cold woman and her profession. Liu Yingxi is no stranger to the profession of doctor. Both her parents were professors at the medical school and doctors at the university hospital. Nowadays, it is popular to ridicule that persuading people to study medicine and lightning strikes from the sky, but some children from doctors' families still choose to study medicine under the influence of their ears and eyes. Liu Yingxi is no exception. After the college entrance examination, he voluntarily filled in a clinical medicine major, and was finally admitted to the medical school where his parents were. In the 8-year clinical medicine program, I studied consecutively with my doctorate. In the first 5 years, I studied everything in internal medicine, surgery, obstetrics and gynecology, and pediatrics. In the 6th year, I began to choose a tutor and a department. When she was a freshman, she made a good career plan and selected the field of oncology as her future research direction. It's a pity that the plan couldn't keep up with the changes. In the summer vacation after her sophomore year, she was a trainee in the oncology department and encountered some accidents, which changed the trajectory of her life ever since. The past is vivid in his mind. Liu Yingxi thought that he would never touch people and things in the medical field except seeing a doctor and taking medicine in his life. Unexpectedly, he met Jianqing. Although she has not embarked on the road of no return to medicine, she always has a strange feeling for doctors who are engaged in oncology. That was her dream, and it was her life's regret. Liu Yingxi turned around, stared at the gauze and hands on the table for a long time, turned over and sat up last, dragged out the medicine box, and walked to the master bedroom. The light in the bedroom was on, and Jianqing was lying on the bed with her eyes closed, without gloomy and cold eyes, with thick long eyelashes, and a peaceful sleeping appearance, just like the sleeping beauty who came out of a fairy tale. Just now under the moonlight, looking at her with a charming filter, she is like a piece of flawless jade lying in the snow. Now that I know the direction of the plot and look at it again, she is like a beautiful snake lying in a secluded forest, the kind with venom. Liu Yingxi wished he could step forward. Reason persuaded her. She saw the dagger that had been polished again shining brightly on the bedside. Liu Yingxi carried the medicine box and walked in lightly. She wanted Jianqing to retreat the cut wound on her left palm to prevent the wound from becoming infected. Unexpectedly, the ice cube fell asleep again. "Are you so sleepy?" Liu Yingxi stood by the bed, looking down at the person on the bed, hesitating whether to wake her up. While hesitating, his eyes glanced at her hands that had fallen outside the quilt. Her left hand was wrapped round and round with gauze. The wound, which had stopped bleeding, cracked again after being squeezed. The blood soaked the gauze and stained the gauze red. Now the wound has adhered to the dressing. Her right hand has distinct joints, long and slender fingers, and round fingers without a trace of nails. The skin on the back of the hand is paler than other places, and there are a few small holes cracked by frost. Such a hand actually made Liu Yingxi feel a sense of intimacy. She had seen many hands like this in the hospital. Every winter, the hands of medical staff are not very good looking. The Department of Infectious Diseases of the hospital emphasizes hand hygiene every 3 days. Hand washing is required during ward rounds, changing dressings, and touching patients. At the end of a day, at least 100 times of hand washing is required. The hands of medical workers will, in all likelihood, peel off, become chapped, and develop chilblains in winter. Over time, they become rough to the touch. Many people will put on a thick layer of hand cream when they sleep, as a protection. Why doesn't this guy wipe some when he sleeps? She vaguely felt that this ice cube didn't care about her very much, and always looked indifferent and didn't care about anything. She didn't say a word when it hurt, and just endured it silently. I don't know what I have experienced, so I put a dagger beside the bed to accompany me to sleep. Liu Yingxi turned his gaze to the dagger on the bedside table, trying to recall more plot details about Jianqing, but he couldn't remember anything. If I had known it would be transmigrated into the book, I shouldn't have skipped to read it last night. Even if I read it completely, I wouldn't be like now, looking at everything like flowers in a fog, hazy. Liu Yingxi sighed, and took out an ointment for removing blood stasis and relieving pain from the medicine box. After reading the instructions carefully, he unscrewed the lid, squeezed some ointment onto a cotton swab, and leaned over to gently apply it on Jianqing's face. The slap marks are mainly due to rupture of subcutaneous capillaries, causing blood stasis. Ice compresses in a short period of time are sufficient to promote capillary contraction, and generally no additional medication is required. But Liu Yingxi had a soft heart and guilt the slap was too hard. She can still feel a numb pain in her left palm, not to mention the red and swollen right cheek of the person in front of her. She is also fortunate that the other party is a woman, not an animal that thinks from the lower body, and her aggressiveness and oppression are much lower than that of men. Then she found a blanket and wrapped it up for her, and went out to cover her face in silence. It doesn't look too bad. At least, not so bad for now. After the ointment was evenly applied, Liu Yingxi stretched out his finger, and lightly poked Jianqing's cheek as a small revenge, then withdrew his hand, and was about to stand up, when his cheek was suddenly covered with a layer of cold touch. Liu Yingxi froze, his eyes fell on Jianqing's face. Jianqing on the bed touched Liu Yingxi's cheek, moved her lips, and said 2 words coldly, "Sleep with you." Liu Yingxi shook off her hand, "I won't accompany you, I'll sleep on the sofa." Jian sat up with one hand propped up, half leaning on the head of the bed, squinting at her, and said lightly, "The guest room is next door." The implication is to let her sleep in the guest room. Liu Yingxi was stunned for a moment, then turned around and left, stopped after walking a few steps, turned around and said, "I brought the medicine box in." Jane glanced at the medicine box that Liu Yingxi brought over, ignored it, and tapped the pillow beside her with her fingertips. Take it back. The guest bedroom is for the original owner to rest." In the first half of the night, the original owner ran over with his pillow in his arms, saying that he was afraid of the dark and the cold, and wanted to share the bed with Jianqing. Liu Yingxi walked over, picked up the pillow and hugged it into his arms. In the eyes of this ice cube, tonight she is a woman who came here with a pillow in her arms to deliberately seduce, but then backtracked, slapped people, called people sick, turned back and forth, and was capricious. Liu Yingxi was so embarrassed that he wanted to dig a hole in the ground with his toes and bury himself in it. Jianqing picked up the magazine beside the bed to help her sleep. "Don't go, do you want to stay?" Still with that cold tone, it seems that he has no interest in Liu Yingxi, and even has a little disgust. Liu Yingxi hesitated for a moment, hugged the pillow, and reminded, "The wound on your left palm, do you want to bandage it again?" Jianqing glanced at the left palm wrapped in gauze, then looked at Liu Yingxi, pondered for a moment, and asked tentatively, "How much do you remember about the debridement and suturing I taught you yesterday?" As soon as this remark came out, Liu Yingxi froze in place, trying desperately to recall the plot. The original owner was a sophomore in the School of Communication, and was introduced to the crew of a medical drama co-produced by the Health Commission, the Propaganda Department, and a film and television company. Since it is a task drama jointly produced by national units, the ideology should not be too outrageous, and the medical knowledge should not be too outrageous. Therefore, the director specially organized the actors of the crew to practice in the hospital for 2 months. Naturally, the hospital did not dare to neglect the mission drama led by the Health and Medical Commission, and asked the Medical Education Department to arrange point-to-point teaching with doctors from various clinical teaching and research departments. Jianqing happens to be Liu Yingxi's temporary tutor. Liu Yingxi looked into Jianqing's eyes, hugged the pillow tightly, and said softly, "I forgot all about it." She studied medicine, but dropped out at the end of her sophomore year. Freshman and sophomore medical students have only taken theoretical basic courses such as histology, biochemistry, systematic anatomy, and local anatomy, and clinical operation skills such as debridement and suture, and they will not be exposed to them until they take the experimental class of surgery in their junior year. Jianqing glanced over with cold eyes. Liu Yingxi was even more confident, but still retorted in a low voice, "Even if you remember, you can't let me sew it for you." When she was a sophomore in college, she was caught by the training teacher of the clinical skills competition for intensive training, and she had practiced those skills, but it had been many years, and her techniques were already rusty. "Even if I can sew, there should be no narcotics at home. I can't use local anesthesia. I can't imitate people in TV dramas. It would be so painful. Or, go to a nearby clinic to sew? I can drive, and I'll take you there." At this moment, Liu Yingxi didn't have any grudges, he just treated Jianqing as an ordinary patient with a cut on his left palm, and expressed his kindness as much as possible. Jianqing looked down at the magazine. "No, we'll talk about it tomorrow." Seeing that she was chasing someone away, Liu Yingxi nodded, and did not forget to remind, "Then remember to clean the wound again." After speaking, she went out with her pillow in her arms, and closed the door by the way. The door closed, and the room fell into silence again. Jianqing looked down at a document on multiple personality disorder in a magazine. She never taught Liu Yingxi debridement and suturing at all, so how could she forget to mention it? In the early morning of the next day, Jianqing directly packed her luggage, and took Liu Yingxi back from the country villa to downtown Zhangzhou. It wasn't for stitches on the palms, but several patients in the group were in critical condition, and the junior doctors couldn't handle it. They made more than a dozen phone calls in one night, and they consulted and reported publicly, but they were actually sending out a distress signal, "You come back quickly, I can't bear it. The New Year's Day holiday is in vain." Jianqing has long been used to the normal state since work, and after thinking about it for a while, she also took Liu Yingxi to the hospital. Jianqing's image in the hospital has always been indifferent and serious, unsmiling, suddenly appeared in the hospital with a faint slap print and a 5 cm gash, and his colleagues laughed teasingly when they saw it, and dared not go forward to ask. Jianqing turned a blind eye, pointing to a baby-faced female doctor, "Wei Mingming, come for stitches." Wei Mingming quickly took the suture bag and was very touched. "Boss, you are so kind. Those patients don't want me to do anything when they see that I have a graduate student's badge. They don't even want to see me. Last time, Dr. Zhao was scratched. She didn't even trust me when she hurt me, and she didn't trust me." The conversation changed, and she couldn't help gossiping, "What's the matter with such a big talk? And the face, who is so bold?" Liu Yingxi lowered his head, trying to minimize his sense of existence, and sneered in his heart, "That's the price of lust. Cut the fruit." Jianqing squinted at Wei Mingming, did not answer what happened to the slap marks on her face, and asked her instead, "Like sewing?" Then go to the emergency department for a rotation next month. I don't like it or I don't like it. I just like to wait on you, boss. Wei Mingming shook his head like a rattle, fearing that he would be dispatched to the emergency department, flattering him all the time. Look at this wound, it was treated in a timely manner, and there is no infection at all. Just look at it, shut up. Wei Mingming fell silent for a moment. In the evening, Jianqing changed shifts with someone else. She is on the second line shift. She can listen to the class at home or sleep in the duty room of the hospital. She will come forward when there are problems that the frontline doctors and the chief resident cannot solve. The frontline doctor on duty today is 5 months pregnant, and there are critically ill patients in the ward, so she is guarding the hospital. The night shift of the oncology department is relatively stable, but compared to the surgical system, there is no need for surgery, and there is not much need to deal with outpatient and emergency patients. Cancer patients will have various critical values, and sometimes encounter difficult rescues. The unlucky doctor on duty has no sleep at night. Most of the doctors on duty on the front line of the critical situation can handle it, and with the assistance of the chief resident physician, Wei Mingming helps. Jianqing quietly checks the literature on the computer and formulates a treatment plan for the patient. Jianqing stuffed Liu Yingxi with a thick stack of documents. It has been 5 years since she left the medical industry, and now she has somehow arrived in this strange world and returned to the familiar medical environment, and she still has a sense of unease in her heart. She couldn't help wondering again, was this a weird dream? She traveled to a world in a book, returning to the age of 20, returning to the hospital, and learning medical knowledge again. Liu Yingxi had had similar dreams countless days and nights, but never had such a real experience. She bit her wrist hard, and there was a piercing pain in her arm, leaving a deep tooth mark on her wrist. Liu Yingxi looked at the tooth marks, and his eyes were almost red again. The bewilderment and powerlessness of wanting to cry but no tears once again aroused the panic in my heart, but I still dare not express it. Jianqing seemed to be aware of it, turned her head and looked at Liu Yingxi with a cold expression. Her aura is too strong, she doesn't talk or laugh, and when her face is expressionless, she is almost so oppressive that people dare not breathe loudly. Liu Yingxi lowered his head, not daring to look at her, trying to squeeze his panic into a corner so that no one would notice. Jianqing stared at Liu Yingxi for a few seconds, pondered for a moment, took out a toffee from his white coat pocket, and stuffed it into Liu Yingxi's pocket without saying a word. Liu Yingxi was stunned, looked up at the beautiful and indifferent face, then looked down at the pocket, hesitated for a few seconds, reached out to pick it up, peeled it off, and put it in his mouth. Sweetness spreads from the mouth. Jianqing took out another one and put it in her pocket. Liu Yingxi suddenly remembered that when she was a child, her grandmother also liked to put a few candies in her pocket when she went to relatives on her back. The journey was long, and she was so bored on her grandma's back that she wanted to cry, and so did her grandma, feeding candies one by one. He peeled off another one and put it in his mouth. The childhood memories brought by the toffee dispelled some uneasiness, and Liu Yingxi thanked Jianqing in a low voice. Jianqing took out the third toffee from his pocket. This time, Liu Yingxi stretched out his palm to receive it. The right and left hands of the two people touched each other briefly. Jianqing gave the candy, withdrew her hand, and continued typing on the computer. With sugar in his mouth, Liu Yingxi calmed down a little bit. His eyes fell on the pile of documents on the table, trying to divert his attention. Whether it was a dream or not, she should calm down, get familiar with the environment as soon as possible, and survive in this strange world. The first affiliated hospital of Zhangzhou University is the leading tertiary hospital in the provincial capital of Province A and the largest teaching hospital in the province. The hospital has built a dedicated tumor comprehensive treatment building. Oncology Department, Radiation Therapy Department, Intervention Department, Hematology Oncology Department, and Tumor Center Laboratory are all set up here, collectively referred to as Tumor Comprehensive Treatment Center. The Department of Oncology has 3 wards. Jianqing is the deputy chief physician of the second tumor area. He focuses on the diagnosis, treatment, and research of lung cancer and esophageal cancer, and also involves the diagnosis and treatment of malignant tumors in the stomach, liver, and breast. Liu Yingxi memorized these information points silently, and halfway through, she took out her mobile phone and quietly searched for the papers published by Jianqing in the past, mainly looking at the first author, as well as the articles of Psi District 1 and District 2. Her parents are both doctors, and she grew up in a family home in a hospital. She also aspired to join the medical field, and she is very unfamiliar with this industry. Tumor is a research hotspot in the medical field, and it is relatively easy to publish papers. But the number of papers does not mean the level of scientific research. It takes at least 2 or 3 years for a good research to produce results. Some people are pouring water in the 4 Psi districts without changing the medicine. Genius has published more than 20 Psi articles at a young age. Seeing people in the industry smash their thighs, is there such a talented young man? After checking, they are all water journals, flooding Jinshan. Liu Yingxi clicked on Jianqing's papers and read them carefully one by one. Suspect my academic misconduct. A cold voice came from his ear. Liu Yingxi straightened his back, and turned his head in the direction of the sound. The tips of each other's noses brushed each other, almost kissed. Liu Yingxi instinctively leaned back. Jianqing stood up straight, tapped the table twice with her fingertips, and the table made a crisp duk-duk sound. She looked at Liu Yingxi, slightly hooked the corners of her lips, and gave a rare smile. Not a self-satisfied mockery, but a calm smile of a young scholar with a well-thought-out plan. It's like a child making a childish provocative behavior, but an adult is unconditionally tolerant. Liu Yingxi suddenly blushed. She really felt that this person's personal morals were a bit corrupt, and she even wanted to check the papers to see if there was any academic misconduct. Being laughed at like this, it seems that she is treating the belly of a gentleman with the heart of a villain. Jianqing lowered her head and rolled up the cuffs of her white coat. I'll go to the consultation, you check it slowly, and when you come back, you will print a copy of the test paper for you to do. Shame and embarrassment were instantly covered by the fear of the exam. Liu Yingxi grabbed Jianqing's wrist. You didn't say you were going to take the exam just now. She suspected that the man was out for revenge. Jianqing responded slowly, it's not too late to say now. After a second pause, he pushed away Liu Yingxi's paw, and said coldly, in the hospital, don't touch me without washing your hands. Liu Yingxi resentfully withdrew his hand and put away his phone, not daring to check Jianqing's papers again. She could see that this man was avenging himself. Deadly cleanliness, be careful. After the consultation, Jianqing did not return to the department, turned around and left the tumor building, took off her white coat, and walked into a beverage shop at the south entrance of the hospital. It was the last month of the semester, and almost all the students in the store were medical students. There were thick blue books and white papers in front of them. It reminded Jianqing of Liu Yingxi, who was aggrieved and memorized the documents in the office. The young female clerk greeted with a smile, welcome, what do you need? Jianqing looked down at the menu. The nouns on the menu were all unfamiliar, so she asked the clerk, which ones are the top 3 in terms of sales? Oh, these types, Siji milk green, boba milk tea, and boba milk green are all favorites of the students nearby. 2 cups of each, less sugar, hot, with whatever toppings you want. Okay. After paying the bill, the clerk looked at Jianqing with a smile, and asked in a friendly manner, are you the doctor of Fuyi? Jianqing nodded and hummed. The clerk continued to speculate, would you like to invite Kore's interns to drink milk tea? Jianqing hesitated for a second, then continued to nod. There was something wrong with the child's mood, like a cat that had been brought home, panicked and extremely unadapted to the unfamiliar environment. She wants to appease. The clerk showed a surefire expression. The doctor in front of him was wearing a white woolen sweater, a white coat hanging on his arm, and a light blue mask covering his mouth and nose, only revealing a pair of deep eyes. His cool and gentle temperament was incompatible with the youthful atmosphere of the beverage shop. Like a calm scholar, he suddenly broke into the snack shop to buy candies that children love. When packing, the clerk gave some extra desserts. Jianqing thanked him for taking it, took the milk tea and dessert, and went back to the office in the second tumor area, but did not see Liu Yingxi and his graduate student Wei Mingming. Only the chief resident Zhang Yu and the advanced student Zhao Wenqian remained in the huge office. She put down the milk tea dessert and asked Zhao Wenqian in front of the computer, "What about them?" The tone of the inquiry was calm. Because the two remaining people in the office, Zhang Yu was taking time out to video chat with his girlfriend, Zhao Wenqian was silently typing on the progress of the illness. It wasn't a tense atmosphere, which meant that during the time she was away, there was no particularly urgent situation in the ward. The two younger sisters went to the classroom to endorse. Zhao Wenqian, who was busy writing medical records, raised her head, saw milk tea and desserts, happily jumped 3 feet high, and hurried to wash her hands. "Leader, I love you. The second-line duty of the department will take turns to pack breakfast for the staff on duty, but it is rare to buy milk tea and dessert as a supper." Jianqing nodded expressionlessly, expressing that she had received love. Afraid that the milk tea would get cold after a while, she took a few cups and put them in an incubator to keep warm. "When I came out, I saw Zhao Wenqian was still writing the medical records, so I said, 'Go back early, and write tomorrow.' 'Okay, I'll go back after I finish writing this.'" Different departments have different atmospheres. The oncology department is a department with a relatively depressing atmosphere. It has dealt with various cancer patients all year round. Most of the medical staff who can stay in this department for a long time are optimistic and open-minded, or people who are indifferent and difficult to empathize with. Although there are also the old problems of public institutions, such as seniority, strict hierarchy, and clique formation, most of the time they get along in a friendly and harmonious way. Not long after Zhao Wenqian left, Liu Yingxi returned to the office from the demonstration classroom. "Dr. Jane, I've finished memorizing it, and I can take the exam." Jianqing handed the printed test paper to Liu Yingxi, 45 minutes. The content of the test paper covers the basic introduction of Zhangzhou First Affiliated Hospital, the business scope of the Comprehensive Tumor Treatment Center, and some basic tumor knowledge. It's like an entry test paper. Half an hour later, Liu Yingxi handed in the paper ahead of time, and Zhang Yu handed her a cup of milk tea and said with a smile, "Here, my senior sister invited everyone to drink, it's still hot." Zhang Yu and Jianqing came from the same school and are still studying for a PhD. Now they are going through the most difficult stage of chief resident. When they get through it, they can directly take the examination of attending doctor after graduation. The chief resident physician, commonly referred to as the boss, is the only way to be promoted to the chief physician. He stays in the hospital 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, and is responsible for routine consultations, teaching interns, and administrative work in the department. The first sentence when the Quality Control Department and the Medical Affairs Department came to the clinical inspector was, "Where is your boss?" Originally, Zhang Yu was assigned to teach Liu Yingxi by the Department of Medical Education, but Jianqing then took him over in the name of an acquaintance. Liu Yingxi took the milk tea. "Thank you, brother Zhang." Jianqing stretched out his ears, waited for a while, but didn't hear Liu Yingxi thanking himself. The hand of correcting the paper paused for a while, and changed the score from 98 to 89. Liu Yingxi took the test paper and looked at it, and became angry like a puffer fish. Only one multiple-choice question was wrong, how could it be 89? Jianqing ignored her resentful eyes, lowered her head and took a sip of coffee, with a calm expression, "It's getting late, go to rest." After Liu Yingxi drank the milk tea and digested for a while, he was driven into the duty room to rest. The duty room of the hospital was dark and cramped, with no windows, and the beds were bunk beds with iron frames. Lu Yingxi recalled that when she was very young, her father hadn't died yet, and he would take her to the hospital even if he didn't worry about leaving her at home alone when he was on duty. At night, let her lie down and sleep in the duty room. It was the same dark room, and the same old canopy bed. In winter, her father would put a thick coat on the bed as a quilt for her. She doesn't like hospital quilts, which always smell of disinfectant. Now this bed has no peculiar smell, only the cold fragrance that permeates the heart. It was exactly the same as the fragrance on Jianqing's body. That clean freak always brings sheets, blankets, and pillowcases from home when he is on duty, and he is very particular about it. Lu Yingxi was a little reluctant to sleep, and could not sleep. He leaned on his arm and silently counted the time in his heart. It is now the beginning of January in the new calendar, and the director asked the actors to intern in the hospital for 2 months, and the shooting will take about 3 months. The remuneration of domestic young actors is used to paying in installments, and they will not be settled in one lump sum. After about 5 months, all the remuneration will be paid, which can be about 100,000 to 200,000 yuan. It's not as big as the millions of big stars, but it's enough for her to live abroad for a while. She does not intend to participate in the grievances of the paper people, and she does not want to interfere with the direction of the story. The initial plan is to hide abroad, stay away from these plot characters, be a salted fish, and wait quietly for the finale of the story. In this way, it might be possible to return to the real world. Lu Yingxi turned over and thought silently, is there any way not to stay by Jianqing's side during these 5 months? This medical drama will be filmed in Fui'ai in the future, and experts from Fui'ai will be hired to check it out. She plays an oncologist. As long as tumors are involved, Jianqing cannot be avoided. Unless you don't take this drama. But in this strange world, she is penniless, has no relatives, and doesn't even have a friend she can trust. How can she survive? It's not that she can't hold down her figure to do part-time jobs. In the early years, she distributed flyers, worked as a group performer, worked as a corpse, and worked as a model. She did all kinds of part-time jobs. It's just that the price/performance ratio is relatively low. In addition to picking up ready-made filming, what kind of part-time job can I earn 100,000 to 200,000 in 5 months? Anyway, the ultimate goal is to survive, go to the finale of the story, and return to the real world. After some self-guiding, Lu Yingxi leaned on his arm and glanced in the direction of the door. There was a faint light coming through the crack at the bottom of the door. It was the light from the office. Jianqing let her into sleep, but she stayed outside. Not tired? Lu Yingxi stared at the beam of light thoughtfully, after a while, slowly got up, tiptoed to open the door and walked out. In the office, Jianqing was wearing a thin white coat, lying on the table with her right arm pillowed, her eyes closed, and her thick long eyelashes cast a shadow, covering the dark circles under her eyes. It's not that this person is not sleepy, it seems that he just doesn't want to sleep in the dark duty room. She seems to be used to sleeping in the light. Bright moonlight, bright lights in the bedroom. Lu Yingxi stood there watching for a while, but did not wake Jianqing up. She went to the changing room to take off Jianqing's overcoat, covered Jianqing lightly, and then went back to the duty room to rest. It was dawn all night. Lu Yingxi woke up early. She thought that Jianqing's left palm had stitches yesterday, so she couldn't get wet, and it would be inconvenient to wash her hands. But she was too embarrassed to take the initiative to help, and she seemed to be courteous for nothing, so she leaned against the bathroom door, watched Jianqing brush her teeth, and waited for Jianqing to ask her for help. Jianqing didn't look at her from the beginning to the end. With her gauze-wrapped left hand behind her back, she finished brushing her teeth with one hand. Lu Yingxi said that you can brush your teeth with one hand, but you have to twist the towel with both hands when you wash your face? Jianqing ignored the existence of Liu Yingxi, picked up clear water with his right hand, wet his face, wiped the facial cleanser, patted it clean, then took out the disposable face towel on the shelf, and wiped the water stains. Still operating with one hand. After washing, with a clean face, she walked up to Liu Yingxi and looked down at her. "Stand still, wait for me to help you wash." Being ridiculed coldly, Liu Yingxi snorted softly, went in to wash up, thinking that you can brush your teeth and wash your face with one hand, and let's see who will help you when you take a shower. While brushing her teeth, she fantasized in her mind that at night, Dr. Jane begged her to help her take a bath, wipe her hair and body, comforting herself with the method of spiritual victory. "I was on duty last night and had to stay in the hospital in the morning before I could rest in the afternoon. The oncology department belongs to the internal medicine system, and there is no major operation in the surgical system. After the early shift, the teaching rounds will start, and the inspection will last for an hour or two. The rest of the time is to issue doctor's orders, see patients, and write medical records." After get off work, Liu Yingxi and Jianqing returned home and shared the same room without unnecessary communication. Liu Yingxi guessed that maybe Jianqing himself was taciturn. Due to his work, he needed to communicate a lot with patients, family members, and colleagues in the hospital. After returning home, he naturally didn't want to talk too much. Problems that many medical workers have. "I am used to life and death and struggle in clinical practice, and my emotions are repeatedly stimulated, and the emotional threshold becomes very high. As long as life and death are not involved, I will be more indifferent to the pain and emotions of people around me, leaving comfort and companionship to unfamiliar patients." Just like her mother Gu Minjiu. Indifference is indifference. Liu Yingxi doesn't care about Jianqing's attitude at all, and he doesn't have the slightest interest in Jianqing. She didn't even regard Jianqing as a real person, but only as a paper man in the virtual world, like an NPC in the game world, a tool man who can use to pass the game. Do you need to care about the attitude of tool people? Of course not. Last night, after not sleeping for a few hours, Liu Yingxi was so sleepy that his eyelids twitched. After eating a few bites at noon, he went back to his room to sleep. When he woke up from his lunch break, he walked out of the bedroom with a dazed look, but there was no one in the living room. This apartment is on the 27th floor. It has 4 bedrooms and 1 living room. It has a duplex structure. The decoration is simple and clean. There is no smell of fireworks, like the Guanggan Palace where Chang'e lives. It really responds to the literal saying "the heights are too cold." Exactly the same as the owner of the apartment. Liu Yingxi walked around a few times, but found no one in the room, so he wandered to the balcony outside the living room. On the balcony, the sun is shining. Liu Yingxi walked over and saw the woman on the reclining chair, wrapped in a white bathrobe, with a slim figure and a pretty face. She closed her eyes and lay on her back on the bench, revealing her fair neck, her soft chest undulating slightly with the rhythm of her breathing. Her long hair, which was as thick as seaweed, was not wrung out, and fell naturally. Water droplets dripped from the tip of her hair, hitting the ground, shattering into one piece. The golden sunlight hit her body, coating her with a hazy filter, just like the east wind thawing, melting the ice and snow, revealing her various amorous feelings. Liu Yingxi stayed where he was, admiring it for a while, moved a small chair, sat down, poked Jianqing's shoulder, and said softly, "Hey, let me help you dry your hair." The person on the recliner opened his eyes and looked over coldly. Liu Yingxi wrapped Jianqing's hair with a towel, patted it gently, and shared her hair care tips. "Don't rub your hair too hard, like this. First press and pat with a towel to squeeze away the excess hair moisture, and then blow it with a hair dryer. It is best to buy a bottle of hair care essential oil, and wipe it on when it is half dry." Jianqing closed her eyes and meditated. She didn't respond. She didn't know how much she had listened to. Liu Yingxi understood her tiredness, and turned the hair dryer to the lowest setting, reducing the noise so that she could fall asleep. The medical industry has always been overworked and is not within the scope of labor law protection. And not only the physical fatigue, but also the spirit, which must be in a state of high concentration at all times. The heavy human life is on the shoulders, and if you don't pay attention, a small mistake may cause irreparable consequences. Blow until it is 7 or 8 minutes dry, and Lu Yingxi leaves her hair to air dry naturally. Now the sun is in full bloom, but it will weaken after 14 o'clock. Lu Yingxi got up and went to the sofa to get a blanket, draped it for her, then sat back beside her, took a pen and paper, and sketched her hair drying in the sun stroke by stroke. In the evening, Jianqing went out for a trip, and when she came back, Lu Yingxi found that there were various hair care products in the house, as well as many tools for left-handed people. Lu Yingxi is used to using his left hand, but many daily necessities, such as scissors, mouse, and hair dryer, are designed to fit the right hand, making it inconvenient to use with the left hand. Since she was a child, she has always made use of it. No one ever noticed her impending doom. Lu Yingxi picked up the new scissors and gestured twice, very smoothly. She looked at Jianqing, her eyes became clear and soft. Jianqing didn't look at her, just doing her own thing in silence as always. Lu Yingxi withdrew his gaze, lowered his head and smiled, and sorted the tools into categories. For the first time, she felt that this mentally ill person was so considerate. The next day is Sunday, but there are no weekends in the hospital, only shifts. Jianqing's working status is even more disrespectful, and most of the time he ignores the existence of Lu Yingxi. Lu Yingxi didn't stay by her side all the time, and occasionally went to help doctors and nurses run errands and deliver printing materials. There is a wish wall in the corridor of the 2nd district of the oncology department. When Lu Yingxi passes by, he will stop and take a look. The walls are covered with colorful stickers with words of encouragement. I will definitely beat the tumor. I still need to study, take exams, and drink milk tea. I haven't had a girlfriend yet. I hope my father will recover, I will take him to see the Great Wall and the Great Wall. These are wishes written down by patients and families. All patients are our comrades in arms. Come on, don't fall down, don't be discouraged, patients and their families are watching you. These are messages written by medical staff. People here are encouraging and comforting each other. Lu Yingxi looked over one by one, and suddenly someone gently tugged at the corner of her white coat. Sister. She looked down and saw a bald little girl with delicate features and a wristband on her left hand. She knelt down, looked at the little patient at the same level, and asked softly, "What's wrong? Is there something uncomfortable?" The little girl's eyes were full of helplessness. "I can't find my mother." Lu Yingxi was startled when he heard the words, and subconsciously made the worst association. There is companionship and comfort in the hospital, and abandonment are indispensable. The bright and dark sides of human nature are staged anytime and anywhere. Lu Yingxi stood up, took the little girl's hand, and led her to the doctor's office. "How many beds do you live in?" The little girl walked with a limp. 8 beds. Lu Yingxi looked down at her calf, and squatted down again. "Want to hug?" The little girl shook her head, lifted her trousers, and showed Lu Yingxi her prosthetic limb. She said in a childish voice, "I just got a new foot last week. I want to walk more. I haven't walked for a long time." Lu Yingxi did not show pity or comfort, but just took off his mask and smiled. "Okay, I will accompany you." As she walked, she asked when and where she last saw her mother. Walking to the doctor's office, Jianqing saw the little girl and said, "Sorry, wait a minute," to the patient in front of him. Then he looked at the little girl. "Sang Sang. Why did you sneak out again?" The little girl named Sang Sang was obviously a little scared. She hugged Lu Yingxi's thigh, hid behind her, and looked at Jianqing with her dark eyes. Lu Yingxi touched her little bald head. "The one in bed number 8 can't find his mother." There should be contact information of family members in the medical records. Jianqing and Sang Sang said, "Your father broke his leg yesterday, your mother went to the orthopedics department to deliver dinner to him, and she will be back later." They told Lu Yingxi, "Take her back to the ward, I have to work overtime tonight, you go eat something first." Lu Yingxi breathed a sigh of relief in his heart, nodded, and left the office holding the little girl's hand. Fortunately, history did not repeat itself. This time, what she met was not an abandoned patient. Working overtime until 8 p.m., Jianqing pulled away from work, remembering that after Lu Yingxi sent Sang Sang back to the ward, she never came back to the office. She got up and went to bed 8 to find someone. Sang Sang in bed number 8 is the youngest patient in Jianqing's hands. Bone cancer has recurred and metastasized after amputation. She is only 10 years old this year. When the malignant bone tumor was discovered, she was only 8 years old. For a certain period of time, she kept complaining of leg pain. Her parents didn't care. They thought it was a child bumping while playing, and put a few Chinese medicine ointments on it. Later, she saw that she was limping in pain. After being abducted, he was taken to the hospital for examination. Back then, the doctor performed an amputation operation on her, sawing off her left calf to prevent the spread of cancer cells. There is an important indicator in the field of tumors called 5-YEAR survival rate. As long as there is no recurrence within 5 years, it can be regarded as reaching the medical standard of cure. After 5 years, the probability of recurrence is greatly reduced. Sang Sang did not survive those 5 years. In the second year after the amputation, the recurrence and metastasis occurred. The cancer cells had metastasized to the lungs, and this time it was no longer suitable for surgery. After MDT, multidisciplinary consultation, discussion, I was transferred from the Department of Orthopedics to the Department of Oncology. Cancer patients will feel more obvious pain at night. Sometimes Sang Sang is woken up by the pain in the middle of the night, unable to see her mother. She will slip out of the ward in fear and go to the doctor's office to find someone. When Jianqing saw her enter the office for the first time, she showed a rare warmth and asked her to sit beside him, waiting for her mother to come back. She didn't dare to refuse, as if she had been kidnapped by bad guys. She sat beside her with an aggrieved face, almost crying with fear. Jianqing is not good at comforting children, and children are also afraid of her. She used to rotate in the pediatrics department, and when she entered the ward, she burst into tears, and the director of the pediatrics department hurriedly pushed her away. Sometimes she and the patient squeezed into the same elevator, and when she met someone holding a child, the child would burst into tears when they saw her in a white coat. Some would stretch out their small hands and push her, shouting with snot and tears, "Bad guy, get away!" She had to get out of the elevator and wait for the next shift. Walking to the door of the 8BED ward, Jianqing didn't go in. She folded her arms and leaned against the door, watching Lu Yingxi coax the child. Lu Yingxi set up a small bed table, sat cross-legged on the bed, drew graffiti on paper, and made up stories while drawing. "Okay, the last story, you have to let me go to eat after I finish telling it." "Well, the last one." Lu Yingxi drew a Q version of a cancer cell with an ink blue signature pen, with a nose and eyes, holding a spear, and bearing its teeth and claws. Another cell with normal shape was drawn, a smiling expression was drawn, and the word cell was written on it. These are called cells. There are many cells living in our body. Suddenly, one day, a bad cell appeared. This bad cell is a rebel in normal cells. Sang Sang's gaze was glued to the paper, quietly listening to Lu Yingxi's story. Bad cells will rob normal cells of nutrients, and the food we eat will be robbed by them, and they won't work. They eat too much and are lazy, so it's useless to keep them. Lu Yingxi then drew a Q version of cancer cells and pulled up a big banner with the word recruitment written on it. They will also recruit troops, continue to grow, and at a very high speed, burn, kill, loot, and set up camps in our bodies, just like the rebels in the picture book Romance of the Three Kingdoms you read. Sang Sang put a lot of picture books beside her bed. Journey to the West, Water Margin, Three Kingdoms. The Three Kingdoms is at the top and the oldest, and the cover has already been rolled up. Liu Yingxi drew another cell with a military cap. There are bad cells that rebel, and naturally there are good cells that suppress. We generally call them immune cells, and immune cells are the police in our body. Then I drew two lungs. Sometimes bad cells disguise themselves as good cells, evade the police, gather here in the lungs, and occupy the mountains as kings. They grow very small, so when there are few, we humans may not be aware of its existence, and we will not be discovered until the number and scale are large. Sang Sang vaguely understood. Does my body have a lot of bad cells? Liu Yingxi nodded. Well, in the past, bad cells gathered on your calf, and the doctor directly performed surgery to remove the bad cells. This is currently one of the most effective ways to defeat bad cells. Amputation is the one-pot amputation of the entire battlefield, which is surgical treatment. Patients with small solid tumors and no local or distant metastasis in the early and midterm can benefit most from surgery. Liu Yingxi pointed to the lungs, but these bad cells are very cunning. They will escape and move their positions. The ones that were originally on the calf have now moved to the lungs and made a comeback. She thought about Jianqing's appearance, and drew an image of a female doctor in a white coat. This is an oncologist. It can be regarded as a general who directs the war, or a commander. It will help you defeat bad cells. You hang up during the day. Those potions pointing to the infusion bottle, that's equivalent to the commander dropping a bomb on the battlefield to kill the bad cells. This has a disadvantage: the good cells may be blown to death in one piece, so after infusing the potion, will lose hair, vomit, very uncomfortable. Infusion therapy is chemotherapy, that is, chemical drug therapy. Chemotherapy drugs are indistinguishable from friend and foe, and while killing cancer cells, they will also kill normal cells. In addition to bombs, the commander also has a laser gun, radiotherapy, which shoots dead cells with rays. Of course, it has the same problem. Both the good and the bad are shot to death. Radiation therapy, that is, the use of radiation therapy. Radiotherapy is also indistinguishable from the enemy, killing 1,000 enemies and harming oneself by 800. Sang Sang frowned and asked, "Can't we just kill the good cells?" "Commander, is she so fierce and so stupid?" Hearing Jianqing being scolded by the childish voice of the little girl, Liu Yingxi was overjoyed, and echoed, "Well, she is fierce and stupid." Jianqing leaning against the door. In the next second, he explained, "Of course, we can't blame her. We haven't found more and better weapons." "Well, there is a way that doesn't kill normal cells. Just imagine shooting an arrow." Liu Yingxi drew a bow and arrow, and a target. When archery, our bow and arrow need to aim at the red dot in the center, which is the target. Bad cells also have targets. As long as the arrow in the commander's hand, targeted drug, aiming at the target, it can precisely kill bad cells without killing normal cells. Sang Sang said, "This is very good." "It is very good, but there are two problems. First, there are not many targets for finding bad cells. Second, we lack suitable arrows, targeted drugs. Therefore, in many cases, there is no way to treat them in this way. Targeted therapy is to precisely target the target of cancer cells and kill cancer cells without damaging normal cells. Is there no other way?" "Yes, start a civil war and let the immune cells attack the bad cells. There are several ways, and I will give one of them as an example. As I said just now, bad cells can camouflage to escape the police, immune cells. Guess how to camouflage?" Sang Sang shook her head, "I can't guess." Liu Yingxi pointed to the immune cell with a military cap that he had drawn before. "This immune cell, it has a lock, PD1, on it, and the bad cell has a key, PDL1, on it. As long as the key in the bad cell's hand is aligned with the lock of the immune cell will not be able to see it as a bad guy, mistake it for a good citizen, and stop chasing and killing it. What we have to do is to paste the key or the lock so that they cannot match, so that the immune cells can recognize the bad cells and kill them. This kind of civil war, returning to the way of immune cells to destroy cancer cells, is immunotherapy. Immunotherapy is the biggest breakthrough in the field of tumors in the past decade. Sang Sang looked at the graffiti and slowly digested the knowledge. Liu Yingxi continued to sketch on the paper, and quickly sketched out a little girl with delicate features, holding the hand of a female doctor. She handed the painting to Sang Sang, and said with a gentle smile, "The doctor and you are comrades in arms fighting side by side, so don't be afraid of the doctor, listen to the doctor's sister, eat and sleep obediently, you have a good rest, the power of immune cells in your body will be stronger." From around 446 BC, the Queen of Persia cut off her cancerous and started the first revolution in surgical treatment of cancer. In the 21st century, with the advent of the era of immunotherapy, the war between humans and cancer lasted for thousands of years. As long as cancer does not disappear, the war will continue. Any patient who looks directly at the disease and bravely fights against the disease is a doctor's comrade in arms. Turn on the faucet, warm water rushes down, and Liu Yingxi washes the stained ink on his hands. In the ward, Sang Sang's mother had already returned, holding Sang Sang and coaxing her to sleep. Liu Yingxi walked to the door and glanced at the little girl lying in her mother's arms. When you are sick, lying in your mother's arms is the most reassuring thing. The sense of security brought by family is something that no one can give. Liu Yingxi smiled, turned, and left. She had been sitting cross-legged for a long time, her legs and feet were numb, and she walked slowly while leaning on the wall. When passing by a small window, she stopped and looked up at the moon outside the window. Her literary accomplishment is not high, and when she sees the moon, all she can think of is the phrase "raise your head to see the bright moon, bow your head to think of your hometown." Hometown, hometown. Will he be able to return to his hometown in his lifetime? Can I see my family again? She hasn't seen her mother for many years. When she was 20, after the breakup, they never said a word. The evening wind was flowing, and she stood in front of the window, motionless, just looking at the moon and missing her hometown. Jianqing came over with a bag of small bread and did not disturb him. The small window only casts a small piece of moonlight, just enough to cover the people by the window. Liu Yingxi stood under the moonlight, and Jianqing stood in the shadows, watching her back, silently guarding her. Liu Yingxi looked at the moon, tidied up his fragile emotions little by little, and when he turned around, he was almost taken aback. Behind him stood a doctor in a white coat. Wearing a white coat and a mask in the hospital is difficult to recognize, but Liu Yingxi recognized Jianqing at a glance. She said nothing on the bed and stripped people of their clothes, while under the bed was a serious and unworldly gentleman, and she only knew such a scum. That scum was leaning against the wall silently, with a beautiful and indifferent face expressionless, and a bag of buns in his hand. Liu Yingxi walked over. "When did you come?" Jianqing didn't answer, nor asked why Liu Yingxi looked like a bunny with red eyes, but just handed out the bun in his hand. Liu Yingxi hesitated for a while, then reached out to take it. She was really hungry with her chest pressed against her back. After tearing open the packaging bag of the bun, Liu Yingxi almost swallowed the rich milk aroma. Jianqing watched her silently, afraid that she would choke, went to the vending machine next to her, and bought a bottle of drink for her. Liu Yingxi sipped his mouth, and his understanding of Jianqing's thoughtfulness deepened. On the second day, Jianqing was in the scientific research class and stayed in the central laboratory all morning. The tumor center laboratory of the first attached hospital has full-time scientific researchers, as well as doctors who come to the clinic to take turns in scientific research classes. Jianqing's left palm was injured, and some operations were inconvenient, so Liu Yingxi was caught and taken to the laboratory to run errands, record data, and do chores for her, working hard without complaint. The scientific research class was relatively free, and in the afternoon, Jianqing took her work home to do. It was snowing outside, and the room was quiet, except for the sound of keyboard tapping. After returning home, Liu Yingxi didn't need to do chores. He was bored, so he found a tape measure and straightened his waist to measure his height. 167 centimeters, about 1.5 centimeters lower than the actual body. Holding the tape measure, she said to herself, I think I can still grow taller. Grow to be as tall as the real world. The sound of typing on the keyboard froze. Jianqing glanced at Liu Yingxi, and said suddenly, You are 20 years old. In fact, the mental age is 25. Liu Yingxi pretended to be tender, and didn't take it seriously. What's wrong with 20? Maybe my epiphyseal line hasn't closed yet, and it can continue to grow, to be taller than you. According to visual estimation, Jianqing is over 1.7 meters tall, with long legs and thin waist, and a good figure, so good that Liu Yingxi is a little jealous. Jianqing withdrew her gaze and didn't speak, pointing to the keyboard, and the tapping sound of da-da-da was even more brisk. A very young child indeed. She was so small that her teeth were still teething, her eyes were red with pain, and she shook and shook in front of a certain doctor, as if she wanted to be asked a few words and said something caring and considerate. Jianqing didn't ask, didn't say anything, pretended not to see, and continued typing on the keyboard with her long and slender fingers. Finally, Liu Yingxi couldn't bear it any longer, and leaned forward and said, My tooth hurts a lot, and I have wisdom teeth. Jianqing didn't raise her eyes. I work on tumors, not on oral cavity. Fake indifference. Liu Yingxi covered his face, bent down to look at Jianqing, and replied vaguely, I'm not asking you to help me pull out my teeth, the oncology department can also treat pain. About 60% to 80% of patients with advanced cancer will experience cancer pain. There is little hope of curing advanced cancer, and there are very limited things doctors can do, pain relief is one of them. Jianqing raised his left hand that had been stitched, and said in a low voice, I don't treat violent medical personnel. Liu Yingxi was in a hurry to seek medical treatment, and gently tugged at the corner of her clothes. Dr. Jane, one size fits all, Hippocrates is watching you in the sky, you must have a conscience to be a doctor, you have sworn an oath. You can't be so narrow-minded. Jianqing looked at her, recalled the oath of medical students and the Hippocratic oath, which was dusty in her heart for a while, and said lightly, leaning forward with her upper body, approaching her, her lips almost touching her earlobe, Student Liu, I have no conscience. After speaking, he gently blew hot air into her ear. The hot air brushed against the pinny, itching and crisping, which made Liu Yingxi get goosebumps. He covered his ears and staggered back a step, almost falling to the ground. He glanced at the woman on the sofa. The woman continued to tap on the keyboard as if nothing had happened. Don't even look at her. His chest was pounding, and his ears were so hot that they were about to smoke. Liu Yingxi covered his ears with a blushing face, and rubbed them vigorously. Ill. If you want to seduce people or tease people, you have to see the target clearly. She's not a man, so what's the point of blowing into her ear? Cursing a few words in the bottom of my heart, Liu Yingxi belatedly remembered gold masters and canaries. Bah, scum! Liu Yingxi didn't pay attention to Jianqing anymore, and went to pick up the medicine box aggrieved. The tingling sensation of hot air entering the ears lingered for a long time, while Liu Yingxi felt the scorching hotness of his ears. He couldn't help but wonder whether the ice cube was for both men and women, or he only liked women. Care what she does? Who cares if she likes men or women? Another voice of hating iron and steel came out of his mind. Liu Yingxi shook his head, put aside those messy thoughts, and concentrated on digging through the medicine box, looking for some ibuprofen to relieve the pain. The medicine box is very large, and different medicines and disposable medical devices are placed in different categories. Liu Yingxi flipped through it, and suddenly found several boxes of morphine hydrochloride tablets in the medicine box, and found a lot of sevoflurane. Morphine is used to relieve cancer pain and acute severe pain in cancer patients. Sevoflurane is a general anesthetic commonly used in the anesthesiology department, and a small dose can bring people down. These two drugs are highly addictive, abuse can cause dependence, and overdose can cause death. In the book, in the later period, Jianqing used fine anesthetics to kill many people, and finally swallowed and injected a large amount of drugs, lying in the snow, silently waiting for the end of his life. Seeing Liu Yingxi pawing around for a long time, Jianqing only grabbed a few boxes of fine anesthetics, walked over, took the medicines in her hand and put them aside. Liu Yingxi sweated from the pain, his soft hair stuck to his ears, pitiful. Jianqing stared at her for a few seconds, stretched out his hand to brush her hair, took an electronic thermometer, and gave her a beep on her forehead. The forehead temperature was 36.8 degrees Celsius, and there was no fever. Open your mouth. The jaw was pinched, this time it wasn't teasing. Liu Yingxi didn't struggle, and opened his mouth obediently. Cold fingers touched and pressed her jaw, feeling the size of the lymph nodes. She frowned, holding back the pain. Having seen and touched it, Jianqing asked, the pain level ranges from 0 to 10. Would you choose a number to describe it? Numerical grading method is a commonly used method for quantitative assessment of pain, from 0 to 10 in ascending order. Liu Yingxi pursed her mouth. 6, it hurts. 4-6 is considered moderate pain, and there are many patients with severe pain ranging from 7-10 in the oncology department. Jianqing is not used to it, and looks indifferent, asking, do you have any history of gastrointestinal diseases and drug allergies? In addition to prescribing the right medicine, you must also take into account the possible toxic and side effects of the medicine. Some medicines are more irritating to the gastric mucosa, some people are allergic to certain medicines, and some medicines cannot be used in combination. Liu Yingxi recalled the memory of this body for a while, and shook his head, neither, nor have I taken any other medicine recently. Jianqing took out amoxicillin and metronidazole and handed them to her. Gargle with salt water, take 2 tablets each, 3 times a day, take after meals, eat a light diet, don't drink alcohol, take ibuprofen according to the situation. After finishing speaking, he squeezed some disposable disinfectant gel and rubbed it, turned around and planned to continue to catch up on the paper. Liu Yingxi grabbed her by the corner of her clothes and refused to let her go. The corner of the clothes was pulled. Jianqing stopped, looked at Liu Yingxi, raised her eyebrows slightly. Liu Yingxi lowered his eyes and said nothing. The black characters on a white background turned into frames of images, and the image of Jianqing lying in the snow, waiting to die, kept appearing in his mind. She wanted to say something, but didn't know whether to say it or not. The pain was so painful that I didn't have the energy to think about it, hesitated for a while, and then said, the medicine is for saving lives, so don't use it to do bad things, okay? Medicine is for curing diseases and saving lives. Don't use it to end someone's life. Don't use it, end your own life. Jianqing looked at Liu Yingxi, not understanding why the child suddenly said such strange words. She looked at the morphine and sevoflurane in the medicine cabinet, thought silently for a moment, and asked, what bad things can I do? Take drugs. When she was in the emergency room, she would indeed encounter some criminals who were addicted to drugs, falsely claiming that they had advanced cancer and severe physical pain, and cheated them into injecting morphine. Liu Yingxi didn't answer, but just clenched the corner of her clothes tightly, as if she would never give up if she couldn't get the promise. Jianqing was a little annoyed. Okay, I won't do bad things. The tone was still a little cold, but there was a hint of helplessness like coaxing a child, go take the medicine and go to the hospital later. Having received the promise, Liu Yingxi loosened the corners of her clothes, covered her cheeks, and asked, what are you going to do in the hospital? Didn't you say you'd let me rest in the afternoon? Jianqing glanced at her, stretched out her hand and flicked her forehead lightly. Take a film, pull out your teeth. Dental department. After taking the dental film, the dentist read the film directly on the computer, took another look at Liu Yingxi, and said with a smile, the little girl has a distinctive appearance, and her teeth are also unique. The two wisdom teeth growing horizontally on the bottom are symmetrical. Pull it out. Hearing this, Liu Yingxi bulged her cheeks, almost wanting to faint in Jianqing's arms. Wisdom teeth grow more freely, horizontally, obliquely, and frontally. Horizontal growth, the medical term is called transverse impacted teeth, close to the nerve, high risk of extraction, difficult, severe postoperative reaction. Often, after the effect of the anesthesia wears off, the patient is crying in pain. Jianqing showed no mercy, take her to pull it out when the inflammation subsides. The dentist nodded cheerfully, by the way, let my students observe and learn. In the teaching hospital, doctors with teaching tasks like patients with typical symptoms the most. When they meet a patient, they can't wait to grab all the students and put their heads on their heads to study. So, on the day Liu Yingxi pulled his tooth, he was surrounded by interns in white coats. The dentist held her face and explained to the students slowly, look, for her impacted teeth, the gums need to be incised, they should be flapped to expose the crowns, and the teeth need to be divided and extracted piece by piece. The lights were too dazzling, and the words were too scary. Liu Yingxi closed his eyes, and tightly pinched the corners of his clothes with his fingers. After the anesthesia takes effect, tooth extraction begins. It's like putting a construction team in his mouth, hammering, prying and drilling, jingling and clanging. The mouth is filled with the smell of blood, mixed with the latex smell of medical gloves, and there are whispers of students in his ears. Liu Yingxi frowned to hold back his discomfort, and fully cooperated with the doctor's actions. No one likes to be used as a teaching specimen, surrounded by a group of strangers, when they are panicking. But teaching is the foundation of medical inheritance, which is passed on from generation to generation by word of mouth. There may be painting geniuses and musical geniuses in this world, but in the field of biomedicine, there are no geniuses, only bit by bit accumulation. The growth of any doctor depends on the accumulation of a large number of cases, which is a field that pays special attention to practice and experience. Liu Yingxi understood this, and was willing to be a guinea pig for the interns to observe and study. The final stitches are also handed over to the interns. The intern was visibly nervous, not to mention that the knot was not smooth, and his hands were still shaking. By the time the sewing was finished, the local anesthesia had worn off. When Jianqing finished work and came to pick up Liu Yingxi was sitting quietly with his hands on his knees for infusion. She bit the cotton swab, looked at Jianqing, her complexion was pale, her cheeks were swollen like a hamster, she was in so much pain that she couldn't speak a word, her saliva was as painful as a knife. The dentist boasted, "Your little girl is so good, she can do whatever she asks, and she doesn't cry or make trouble." Liu Yingxi glanced at the dentist, and silently slandered, "That's because the pain is so painful that you don't have the strength to howl, your student's technical level is too poor." Jianqing came in from the cold outside, she put her hands on Liu Yingxi's head, rubbed it gently twice, and said calmly, "Don't be deceived by her appearance, she may be cursing in her heart. Dear Drinking Creek. You nonsense. Avoid spicy food after tooth extraction, and can only eat liquid or semi-liquid food." Jianqing touched the stitched left palm and told Liu Yingxi, "The next meal should be light, and I will cook. If you feel uncomfortable, please tell me." Liu Yingxi nodded gratefully. These days, she only eats from cafeterias or takeaways, and she hasn't eaten the meals made by Jianqing herself. Unexpectedly, on the first night after tooth extraction, Jianqing cooked a pot of hot pot full of aroma, and in front of Liu Yingxi, cooked the small fat beef, boiled tripe and vegetables slowly, eating with gusto. Lu Yingxi, with a dull face amidst the aroma, held a bowl of bland egg custard, spoonful after spoonful, swallowing hard. The next night, Jianqing got off work late and didn't cook in person, so he packed spicy crayfish and came back. She hadn't removed the stitches on her left palm, and it was inconvenient to peel off the shell, so she ordered Lu Yingxi to peel it off for her. People under the eaves had to bow their heads. Lu Yingxi smelled the spicy and fresh scent, and was so bullied that she was about to cry. Resisting the urge to poison her, she peeled them off one by one. Deliberately, absolutely intentionally retaliating, she should also avoid the injury of her left palm, but she would rather hurt herself by 800 than kill the enemy by 1000. A cruel and petty woman. Jianqing looks gentle, eats elegantly, picks up a piece of shrimp meat, chews it slowly, and eats it slowly. His eyes are glued to Lu Yingxi's face, and he speaks slowly, "You're scolding me in your heart again." The cold tone made Lu Yingxi shake his head like a rattle in fright, holding up the rice porridge and swallowing slowly. On the third night, Lu Yingxi couldn't stand her anymore and planned to run away from home. It's better to go outside and eat batter alone in the cold wind than to be tortured by Jianqing. Unexpectedly, before he walked out of the house, his footsteps faltered for a while, and then his whole body became hot, which made his head feel chaotic. "I have a fever. Infectious fever after tooth extraction." The oral cavity is an environment with bacteria. After tooth extraction, people with low immunity, such as the elderly and children, are prone to infection if they are not careful. She had been infused in the hospital before, but unexpectedly she was still recruited. The quality of this body is much weaker than that of the real world. Lu Yingxi supported his head, calmly rummaged through the medicine box, and took his temperature. 38 degrees Celsius. If the fever caused by tooth extraction does not exceed 38.5 degrees Celsius, it is good to take anti-inflammatory drugs at home. Lu Yingxi fed himself medicine, poured a large cup of hot water, took a pillow and lay down on the sofa with his eyes closed. When Jianqing came back from get off work, the living room was not lit like it was a few days ago, it was dark and cold. She stood at the entrance, stunned for a few seconds, and when she came back to her senses, she slowly peeled off the buttons of her coat with both hands, but the gloomy coldness accumulated in her eyes little by little. He took off his black coat, hung it on the coat rack, and glanced at the shoe cabinet. Deerdrink Creek's boots are still there. Did not leave. The gloomy expression instantly eased a bit. After Jianqing changed her shoes, she walked to the living room, and with the faint light outside the window, she saw a group of figures huddled on the sofa. She walked over and wanted to reach out to touch Lu Yingxi's forehead, but she was afraid that her cold hands would freeze someone, so she put them on her neck to warm up first, and then touched it. Hot forehead. Lu Yingxi, who was half asleep and half awake, frowned when he heard the slight movement. The air she inhaled and exhaled was hot, her throat was sore and dry. She opened her eyes, and saw a beautiful and indifferent face. The wings of his nose fluttered, and he sniffed vigorously. Someone's originally clear and cold fragrance was covered by the alcohol smell of hand sanitizer gel. So he frowned slightly, and muttered in a low voice, "You have been pickled by the hospital. It's only burning and confused, so I dare to be so bold, and I despise the angel in white who saves lives and heals the wounded." Jianqing flicked Lu Yingxi's forehead lightly, took a thermometer to measure her body temperature, and asked, "Have you taken your medicine?" Lu Yingxi lay on the sofa, hugged the pillow, and said softly, "I took anti-inflammatory drugs." His voice was dry and hoarse, not as pleasant as usual. Jianqing turned on the light and went to pour a cup of warm water. "Drink more hot water." Lu Yingxi took the water glass and smiled. This statement is often ridiculed by straight men and perfunctory. In fact, from a medical point of view, it is good to drink more hot water. Of course, it should not be too hot, above 65 degrees Celsius. Too hot food will damage the esophageal mucosa, the epithelial cells of the mucosa will fall off after being burned, and new cells will divide and grow in the esophagus. Repeated scalding and shedding will result in repeated division and growth, while gene mutations occur during cell division, and the more times of division, the greater the probability of mutation. Among them, there is a kind of mutated cells that will break free from the shackles that shackle themselves, avoid the pursuit of the immune system, plunder the nutrition of normal cells, and run amok in the human body, attacking cities and territories, the so-called cancer cells. In a word, long-term consumption of too hot water or food will increase the risk of esophageal cancer. The knowledge learned in the past is played back in my mind one by one. Liu Yingxi once deliberately avoided everything related to medicine, but now he always thinks of it inadvertently. She took small sips of warm water, moistened her throat, and silently thought about the reason. Perhaps, in a strange world, facing strangers one by one, familiar things can bring some insignificant sense of security. Her brain subconsciously helped her find a sense of security. The human body is an exquisite instrument. Regardless of whether it accepts the changes in the external environment subjectively or not, the body is always subtly coordinating and adapting to the changes in order to integrate into the environment as soon as possible. The smell of alcohol was still floating in the tip of his nose. Liu Yingxi seemed to think of something, suddenly threw away the pillow, staggered back to the bedroom, ran out again, and stuffed a box of things into Jianqing's arms. Jianqing opened the package and saw that it was a brand new hand cream. A few days ago, while shopping for daily necessities, Liu Yingxi saw the hand cream on the display shelf, and inexplicably remembered Jianqing's hands, so he bought it, but he couldn't find a reason to give it to her. Today is just right, with a valid reason. Hands smell of alcohol, put some fragrance on them. Jianqing looked at Liu Yingxi, but said nothing. She has always kept few words and never showed her emotions. She has extremely beautiful eyes with dark jade-colored pupils. When she stares straight at people, she can make people's hearts jump. Uncomfortable being stared at, Liu Yingxi squeezed the water glass tightly, mustered up courage, and whispered to her, "What are you looking at? I bought it with your money, and the wool came from sheep. She came to this world penniless, and even her body was taken care of by others. All expenses are now borne by Jianqing." She recorded the account on her mobile phone, and planned to return it all to Jianqing when she left. Being murdered, Jianqing just let out a light "oh," put away the hand cream, and said, "I'll put it on later, I still have to cook." Liu Yingxi reminded, "You should also apply it before going to bed at night, and you should apply it frequently, and apply a thick layer. In the hospital, you have to wash your hands dozens of times a day. If you don't take good care of them, how rough will your hands be?" Jianqing nodded and asked her, "What do you want to eat tonight?" Liu Yingxi froze for a moment, then beamed with joy, "I want to drink broth." She was tortured for 2 days and 2 nights. She could only smell the smell of meat, but she couldn't eat half an ounce of meat. She was about to die of hunger. Even if she can't bite the meat now, she still has to pour some meat-flavored soup into her stomach. Jianqing went to the kitchen to get busy, while Liu Yingxi followed her from the living room to the kitchen like a clingy cat, dragging her hot sick body. "I was dizzy from the fever, my willpower declined, my self-control was not as good as usual, and my mouth was like an unlocked box, babbling nonsense out. Why don't you have a big bed of 500 meters and a housekeeper and nanny?" She used to read through books and novels. The protagonist either kicks the male lead and embraces the female lead or is wealthy. She transmigrated and became a canary, and the beneficiary who followed was not well received and did everything by herself. Even cooking has to be done by yourself, shouldn't it be some kind of ant? Jianqing didn't laugh at her silly words, and answered the question cooperatively while cutting the green onions, "It's not that much money." During fever, the cerebral cortex is in a state of extreme excitement, the metabolism of brain tissue is accelerated, and it is in a state of relative hypoxia, which in turn leads to brain cell dysfunction, and the external manifestation may be talking nonsense. Your family is rich. This paper man is a veritable rich second generation, the kind who can go home and inherit the family business if he doesn't become a doctor. Theirs, not mine. Why do you bring me back if you don't have any money? You let me take it. Lu Yingxi snorted softly, unable to recall this memory. She read novels by skipping. She didn't know the plot, and the memory of the original owner was also intermittent and incoherent. So, I said what was on my mind. I don't remember, I asked you to take it and you took it. Jianqing didn't answer and fell into silence. Lu Yingxi misunderstood her silence. Over the years, Lu Yingxi has read a lot of goofy scripts, such as Double Lovers, Seeing Things and Thinking About Others Suddenly Possessed by Drama, and said angrily, "Do you have another Bai Yueguang who can't love you and went abroad? I Bai Yueguang, who looks like you, will kick me away when your Bai Yueguang comes back." Menacing, as fierce as a cat with fried hair. Jianqing looked up at Lu Yingxi, couldn't hold back, and chuckled. The laughter is very nice, like a feather falling on the tip of the heart, which disturbs people's itch. Lu Yingxi avoided looking at each other, turned his back to Jianqing, lay on the door, and scratched the door with his paws. "You still laugh at me, why are you like this? You are not only a scum, you are also such a scum." The tone became more and more aggrieved. Jianqing sighed inaudibly, and explained, "No, don't think about it. She doesn't have any messy white moonlight." Lu Yingxi got up from the door, like the leader of the inspection work, put on a similar expression, then lowered his voice, and said softly, "The floor of your house is so soft, it's soft to step on." Jianqing glanced at the floor. The floor is paved with hard polished tiles. It was really badly burned. She walked over, pulled Lu Yingxi out of the kitchen, pressed her onto the sofa, and took her temperature again, which was over 38.5 degrees Celsius. "I'm going to take antipyretics. I'm fasting, I'm hungry, I don't take medicine, I want to eat." Jianqing wrapped her in a blanket, took an ice pack, wrapped it in a thin towel, and put it on her forehead to cool down physically. "Stop running around, sit and rest, and call you when you're done." He was dizzy from the burning, but Lu Yingxi was in an inexplicably happy mood, and pulled Jianqing's clothes to reason. "I have bad teeth, your meat should be cooked softer, and the recent rice should be steamed softer, too. You can eat delicious food in front of me. Also, you can't hold grudges like this anymore. You are probably the reason for my illness. Originally, you saw my naked body, and I slapped you. It's flat. I accidentally hurt your palm, and I also suffered from toothache. Now it's really even. Don't hold grudges, we live under the same roof, we have to share weal and woe." After a bunch of unreasonable tirade, Jianqing stretched out her hand and gently stroked the tear mole at the end of Lu Yingxi's eyes, without saying anything. She felt that she had picked up a little ancestor and brought her home. Really shared joys and sorrows. There is no difference in treatment. Tonight, both of them are egg custard, served with lean meat broth. Jianqing's cooking skills are very good. Lu Yingxi drank all the soup contentedly, and showed Jianqing the bottom of the empty bowl. "Can you continue to cook tomorrow when you have time? I still want to drink it." Jianqing nodded in agreement. After the meal, after taking the medicine, Lu Yingxi lay down on the sofa again. Jane took a shower, hugged the computer, and sat beside her to write the application for the Scientific Research Fund. Today, Lu Yingxi spent almost all of his time on the sofa. He would rather curl up in the corner of the sofa than lie on the big bed in the room. The room is big and the bed is big, but it seems too spacious for one person. She wants to be with someone. When sick, it is always easier to feel lonely and powerless than usual, especially in this strange world with no relatives and friends. She only knows Jianqing. Jianqing is also a doctor. Doctors can bring a great sense of security to patients. Although she didn't wear a white coat at home, Liu Yingxi smelled the familiar cold fragrance on her body again, like the cold air inhaled into the nose when it snows in winter. The clear and clean smell reminds people of the snow in their hometown sky. Liu Yingxi sniffed her breath, listened to the sound of da-da-da on the keyboard, and fell asleep in a daze. Occasionally, the sound of keyboard tapping would stop, and the world would fall into silence, and then a cold palm would come over, with the palm pressed against the forehead, and then flipped over, and the cold back of the hand would stick over. Wait until the palm temperature is the same as the forehead temperature, then switch to the other hand. Consciousness was ups and downs. Liu Yingxi only felt peace of mind. After both hands, which were as cold as ice cubes, warmed up, the faint sound of keyboard tapping sounded again, accompanied by a low sigh. It's better than a hand warmer. Liu Yingxi moved his fingertips, swallowing back the emotion in an instant, hating himself for being so weak from the burn that he couldn't get up and bite her. On the day when the stitches were removed, Liu Yingxi still went to the dental department and handed himself over to the interns to practice. In teaching hospitals, doctors at the attending and director levels no longer need to do basic tasks such as stitch removal, but leave them to interns, who may be more proficient than them. Jianqing just finished the outpatient clinic, so he turned a corner and came to the Department of Stomatology to pick up Liu Yingxi and go to the cafeteria for dinner. She stood beside Liu Yingxi, folded her arms, and stared at the intern's operation. Seeing her, the intern shouted tremblingly, "Hi, teacher." Interns are considered to be at the bottom of the hospital's food chain. No matter which department they see, they have to call out to teachers. Jianqing glanced at the intern, and replied politely, "Hello." Seeing that his hands were shaking from nervousness, he walked away, turned around to talk to his old classmates. After she walked away, the intern was visibly relieved, and the demolition was finished in 3 steps. Liu Yingxi got up from the dental chair, rinsed his mouth, and said politely, "Thank you, I missed your get-off work time." "It's okay, it's okay." The intern brother took off his gloves and washed his hands, rubbed his face nervously, then took a deep breath, took out his mobile phone from the pocket of his white coat, and mustered up the courage to ask for contact information. "I'm sorry last time, I'm not very skilled at sewing, can we add a WeChat account? I'll treat you to milk tea." The peach blossom luck came too suddenly. Liu Yingxi covered his cheeks, and subconsciously looked in the direction of Jianqing. Jianqing was immersed in looking through the cases of oral and maxillofacial tumors, and seemed not to notice the movement here. Liu Yingxi was not interested in these paper figurines, so he politely declined the request. The intern moved her lips vividly, but before she could say anything, Jianqing stood up and walked over. "Let's go, let's eat." Liu Yingxi waved his hand and said goodbye to the dentist and intern. Walking on the road, she asked Jianqing, "Eat the cafeteria or go home?" "Canteen." "Is there any clinic in the afternoon?" "No." "Are you in the ward this afternoon?" "Exist." After asking several questions in a row, Jianqing answered concisely. Liu Yingxi could tell that she was not interested in chatting. This person is usually not talkative, not that he has poor communication skills. It can even be said that his communication skills are very good. Sometimes he will gently remind the patient to let his family members accompany him in order to deal with the subsequent notification of some unfavorable test results. Now he looks indifferent and doesn't answer, he just doesn't want to chat. Liu Yingxi pursed his lips, and tactfully did not speak again. When she was sick, she would feel that Jianqing was not so cold and the distance between them was not so far. Perhaps, taking care of patients and being close to patients is just a professional habit of doctors. Liu Yingxi didn't have the soft and sticky feeling when he was sick, and his sanity regained, and his brain would send out alerts from time to time, warning himself to keep a certain distance from this person. Knowing that it is best to keep a distance, but because of Jianqing's attitude of being close and far away, a little grievance sprouted. After finally suppressing the grievance, Lu Yingxi reacted belatedly. She actually started to care about Jianqing's attitude. A small piece of the carefully constructed psychological defense collapsed because of a dependence during illness. In fact, Jianqing's attitude towards her was not warm from the beginning to the end. During the class time, business affairs are treated equally. Outside the class time, the communication between each other is almost zero, like strangers living under the same roof. Except for the first night, and the sick night. The first night was the closest to her body. She was covered with thorns from inside to outside, piercing Jianqing to the point of blood. The night of her illness was the closest to her psychological distance. She let go of all her defenses, approached, relied on her, played petty temper, and Jianqing accepted them all. Then, she began to yearn for the peace of mind and warmth when they were close to each other. Not caring is a very personal emotion, and not bringing personal emotions to work is the basic quality of the workplace. Lu Yingxi has been in the society for a while, understands this, and in the afternoon, he still obediently follows Jianqing like a little tail. She tried not to care. She just wants to refamiliarize with the medical environment, put herself in the role, finish filming the medical drama, get the money, and fly away. But the number of times to see Jianqing has unconsciously increased. Jianqing lowered her head and rolled up her cuffs, her eyelashes drooping. Her eyelashes are long and curly, and when she droops or closes her eyes, it will weaken her sense of coolness and distance. Lu Yingxi looked at her and couldn't help but want to get closer, count and touch her eyelashes. Her appearance is very good. When Lu Yingxi saw her for the first time, she felt that she was as beautiful as a flower in a mirror, like a moon in the water, unattainable. After a little contact with her, I felt that she was gloomy and perverted, her personal morals were corrupt, and even her face became hateful. I have been in contact with her a lot. Looking at her again today, I suddenly realized that the white coat on her body fits very well, like a tailor-made white windbreaker. It seems to have fallen into the triple state of looking at the mountain is a mountain, seeing the mountain is not a mountain, and seeing the mountain is still a mountain. Lu Yingxi lowered his head and smiled. Doctors at Jianqing's level no longer need to write medical records in person, that's the job of interns, graduate students, and residents. There is one medical record exception: medical records of clinical trials must be written by researchers themselves. She has 2 or 3 clinical trials at her fingertips, and she is often blocked in the office by research assistants, forcing her to type medical records. She would complain in a low voice with no expression on her face, "I haven't written this thing for 2 or 3 years." While making complaints in a low voice, he was typing on the keyboard seriously. Lu Yingxi would think that Dr. Jian, who was forced to work, was a little cute, and couldn't help laughing. The smile was so bright that Jianqing caught him right away. Jianqing looked at her and raised her eyebrows lightly. Lu Yingxi couldn't laugh for a moment, she lowered her head and silently recited the material at hand. Jianqing does not have the task of teaching interns, and is only responsible for teaching graduate students, residents, and advanced students. She never intentionally made things difficult when she was teaching ward rounds. She would pull out cocoons and guide the thinking of subordinate doctors from the outside to the inside. She seemed to know all kinds of intractable diseases, like a walking textbook, which attracted countless admiring eyes. Lu Yingxi remembered hearing gossip from junior doctors last time, saying that when Jianqing was in charge of teaching interns, almost every intern fell in love with her, and the rumors made the director of the medical department talk to her. Men are no longer accepted. Wei Mingming is the only graduate student under Jianqing, and she can be regarded as her founding disciple. Wei Mingming has a carefree personality, and he takes care of chores such as taking out food and delivering materials. After delivering the materials, he would say to Jianqing unceremoniously, "Boss, I'm thirsty and want to drink milk tea." Jianqing sat in front of the computer and tapped, without looking at her, "It's not healthy, drink less." "Wei Mingming, you bought it for us last week." "Jianqing, I drank it last week, but it's gone this week. Wei Mingming looked at Liu Yingxi for help. Everyone in the department knew that the two of them were acquaintances, and they seemed to be distant relatives. When Liu Yingxi received the call for help, he hesitated for a moment, made an okay gesture, moved to Jianqing's side, and tugged at the corner of her white coat. "Dr. Jian, I want to drink too." Jianqing turned her head and glanced at her, then turned back to look at the computer screen, and also said coldly, "It's not healthy, don't drink it." Immediately forbid her to drink. The next second, he took out the mobile phone in the pocket of the white coat, "Order some juice." Liu Yingxi put his hands behind his back and made a yeah gesture. Wei Mingming stepped forward to take the mobile phone, and opened the takeaway app skillfully. "Juice is also available, which one can I order?" "I want to pick the most expensive one, boss, what do you want to drink?" After typing out the medical records, Jianqing looked at the CT scan on the computer. "Don't drink, go and make me a cup of coffee." Wei Mingming, who was buried in ordering takeout, raised his head and broke the stage. "Boss, is coffee healthy?" Jianqing's cold gaze swept over. Wei Mingming put his hand to his mouth, and skillfully zippered to shut up. If she didn't shut up again, she was worried that she would be stitched up by Jianqing. Liu Yingxi consciously took over the work and went to the boiling water room to help Jianqing make coffee. Drinking coffee in the hospital does not pursue the taste, but only to dispel sleepiness, and the brewing method is simple and rude. Put the coffee powder and sugar, pour boiling water, and the strong aroma penetrates into the nasal cavity. Liu Yingxi gently stirred the amber liquid in the cup, and couldn't help but wonder if Jianqing heard the conversation between himself and the dental intern in the morning. Why did he suddenly have a prejudice against milk tea? And vaguely noticed that her attitude towards herself had changed slightly. Seems to have gotten some kind of favoritism from her. Does that mean that she also likes to be close to each other? Liu Yingxi didn't dare to confirm. Because of this vague guess, his heartbeat suddenly became chaotic for a few beats. In the hospital, there is not much time and space to sort out personal emotions. After making coffee, Liu Yingxi returned to the office and saw Jianqing talking with a grey-haired family member. Sitting next to the family member was a young patient in a hospital gown who looked less than 30 years old. Solid tumors are closely related to age. Most of the patients in the oncology department are middle-aged and elderly patients. However, in recent years, young patients in their teens and 20s have gradually increased. Cancer presents a trend of younger age. The test results came out. CT showed that the lesion had not shrunk, but was a little bigger than before. The original chemotherapy drug may have produced drug resistance, that is to say, it failed and didn't work. Next, we need to change to a new chemotherapy regimen. As always, with a calm and flat tone, those who are not familiar with the medical environment will feel that the doctor is too indifferent at first. In fact, there is already a touch of thoughtfulness. When the medical staff in the oncology department talk in front of the patient, they are afraid of stimulating the patient's emotions, so they avoid using words such as cancer and tumor. Knowing the progress of the disease, the patient's face was pale, and the family members were anxious, looking at the doctor with pleading eyes. This is the normal state of the oncology department. Doctors announce to patients time and time again the failure of the plan and the progress of the disease. Jianqing did not stop to comfort her, and continued to calmly discuss the treatment plan with them. Wandering and hesitating can't bear it, but it can't solve the problem. Experienced doctors have become accustomed to point to the nail on the head, face the problem directly, inform the family members of the patient's true situation, and propose follow-up alternative treatment options. Facing the problem directly is the best and necessary choice for both doctors and patients. You're still young. After the patient and his family members left, Liu Yingxi looked at the patient's lung CT with regret. 28 years old. Jianqing lowered her head and took a sip of her coffee. How long has it been? Phase 4. Liu Yingxi lowered his eyes. 28 years old, only 3 years older than her. Life is very good, facing death at this age, who would not want to struggle to survive? Jianqing glanced at Liu Yingxi, and stuffed a copy of Introduction to Oncology into her arms. Come to class with me later. She has 2 theory lessons for the students at 4 p.m. Liu Yingxi pulled away from the heavy emotions and asked, what am I going to do? Do you need a special person to serve you tea and water in class? Jianqing, listen to the class. The north wind howled. The Department of Clinical Medicine of Zhangzhou University is only separated from the affiliated hospital by a wall, and doctors can rush to the teaching building after taking off their white coats. Walking on campus, Liu Yingxi is like a child forced by his parents to go to school, facing the north wind, walking step by step, reluctantly. The campus has been covered by winter snow. Liu Yingxi stopped in front of a clump of green plants, stretched out his hands to pinch the leaves of the trees, and gently folded them to reveal a piece of ice leaves with clear veins. When she was a child, in the winter in the countryside, she often peeled off the ice flakes that had condensed on the leaves, and ate them in her mouth, chewing them until they were crunchy. Thinking of childhood memories, his heavy heart was relieved a bit. Liu Yingxi pinched the ice leaf, and looked at the tall figure in front of him. Did she call herself out because she was afraid that she would be depressed if she continued to stay in the oncology department? Thinking about it this way made me feel very soft. Liu Yingxi caught up and grabbed Jianqing by the corner of his clothes. Mr. Jian, I will give you a leaf. Jianqing took the crystal clear ice leaves. If you keep walking slowly like this, I will be caught by the medical department and be late. Hey, is it considered a teaching accident if you are late for 5 minutes? As long as you are not caught by the director, you can still intercede if you are caught by other teachers in the medical department. Many of the teachers in the medical education department of the hospital are doctors who have resigned to the second line of clinical practice. Coming from the clinic, I naturally know how busy the doctor is. Occasionally, I will turn a blind eye when I catch him being late once or twice. Moreover, most of the students who come to teach students are doctors at the level of deputy directors and chief physicians. There are advantages and disadvantages to selling personal favors. Maybe one day relatives and friends will need this kind of personal relationship when they seek medical treatment. Jianqing avoided this question, tapped the ice leaf twice with his fingertips, and asked Liu Yingxi, you know hospitals and medical schools very well. Have you ever studied medicine and stayed in a hospital? The cold but determined tone shocked Liu Yingxi to put away all his soft thoughts in an instant.